Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Lifespan Draining Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoriya had never really considered letting go of his dreams until it was too late. He never really looked around at the heroes that fought around the world and though that it might be too dangerous a job for him. He never looked at the up-and-coming heroes, with their bruises and exhaustion, and thought that he just might be a bit too weak to be a hero. He didn't think about how quixotic he was until he hit the ground, a sickening thud, pain radiating throughout his body. He didn't even let the word villain cross his mind unless it was about how disgusting they were and how toxic they were to society. He didn't even think about how irony was the sharpest weapon he could ever wield until it was all he had left. As he pushed himself off the ground, barely aware of the crippling pain in his arms, he looked around, memories on the tip of his tongue. He remembered standing on the roof of his school, starting down the 17-meter drop to the ground, remembered tasting the bile in his throat as his vision spun. He remembered the wind on his face as he fell, he remembered the notebook as it approached him, charred pages lying on the ground. He could just barely make out Kaken telling him to dive from the roof and pray he got a quirk in the next life in the back of his memory, but as he saw the notebook lying in the pond next to him and smelt the pavement under his nose, he decided that he hadn't died. He couldn't even kill himself right. What kind of F-up couldn't jump from the 5th story and die once and for all? His body screamed at him from every limb, skin split and scraped. He was bleeding, but it was only a light trickle from shallow wounds. He silently thanked his past self for jumping with his books, which were lying next to him, scattered and messy. His body begged him to stay still, but he bit his lip and relied on his pain tolerance to get him through the rest of the day. None of his limbs were broken, since he could still use everything no problem, and if he injured an organ, he could only be so lucky to die in his sleep. He gathered the books and ignored the stares from other students as he trudged down the street, headed back home. They were used to him looking worse for the wear, his relationship with Kaken a well-known fact. He repeated it out loud and it felt acidic in his mouth. He had been a fool to think he'd ever be able to befriend Bakugou again. He'd been a fool to hold onto the last threads of hope that they'd ever talk like kids again, friendly and enthusiastic. He'd been a fool to let himself fall into the repetitive lull of his daily beating and Midoriya Izuku was a fool, and Bakugou Katsuki was not his friend. Midoriya Izuku was an absolute fool, and he hated Bakugou Katsuki. A small part of him begged him to push himself back up, to rebound like he had all those times before, but in the past few years, that small part of him had been shrinking, withering under the hatred and lack of belief everyone showed him. That part of him knew he could still become a hero, knew that he was worth more than Bakugou said he was. He pushed that part back down as he choked up a sob. He did his best to stay quiet as he walked through the back alleys to his house, not wanting to embarrass himself any further that day. He had already failed to kill himself, he didn't need anyone to see him like this. His mind was cranking over thoughts as he walked listlessly. When had he really, truly given up hope at being a hero? When had he let himself fall willingly to Bakugou? Why did he keep returning to him? The questions echoed in his mind as he ducked into the dark tunnel near his house, but each one led back to the same truth. As long as someone like Bakugou was going to be a hero, and he was with his flashy quirk and his great grades, how was someone as weak as Midoriya going to be anything? His mind was a dark cloud of misery as the figure rose behind him, and he barely had time to react as it made to swallow him alive. Would you look at this? A medium-sized invisibility cloak. Midoriya tried to scream, but his mouth was clogged with slime, choking his airways and blinding him. He had wanted to die, but not like this, not by someone else's hand. He wanted to die on his own time, not be forced into the SBMSN of unconsciousness. He fought and thrashed, but as he moved, he felt his body becoming unnaturally tired, and he cried out, not ready to die just yet, not anymore. He felt like the world was caving in on him as his vision faded to black, and he swore he saw a familiar flash of blonde. He didn't pay it much mind as his entire body suffocated on itself, and he felt simultaneously too big for his body and too small for the world. He could feel his head rolling as pressure coiled deep in his chest and the slime started to loosen around him before being blown away entirely. He briefly wondered if Bakugou had come to antagonize him more before he lost all consciousness. All Might. When he woke up, he was staring at his idol, the tall, buff man checking him over. He was almost relieved that it wasn't the blonde of Bakugou, but at the same time it only confirmed that the explosive teen really did hate him and he meant nothing. Ah, good. You're awake and unharmed, which is what is truly important. My sincerest apologies for letting the villain drag you into what was never your conflict. I became lost in the unfamiliar territory. Regardless, thanks to you and your quirk, the villain was weak enough to subdue, and I have captured him flawlessly. But now I must be going. This villain must be delivered to the police. Stay safe, kid. Midoriya barely registered the signature in his notebook and stared with a stupor when All Might mentioned his quirk. He had half a mind to protest that he was quirkless, but before he could act, All Might was gone. Midoriya simply slumped over in despair and confusion. All Might had mentioned his quirk, but he had none. He was simply a quirkless loser who couldn't even watch out for himself. The villain simply had succumbed to the force of All Might's blows, though that didn't explain why it had begun to loosen. All Might would have been able to simply blast the villain to shreds with his power. There was no need to let Midoriya go. Which made Midoriya think something had been done to the villain, but no one else had been there, and All Might wouldn't have simply let them go. And if they had been a hero, they would have stuck around to assess the situation of the casualties. Which left only Midoriya and All Might, and, based on All Might's words, it wasn't part of his incredible quirk. According to All Might's words, he was also unharmed, which he knew to be a lie, considering he had jumped off a roof not a few hours earlier. But as he looked down at himself, he saw that his skin was just as healthy as usual, no aches or pains anywhere. Now more confused than suicidal and upset, Midoriya found himself wandering home, not paying attention to his surroundings. As he arrived home, he found himself with more questions and fewer answers. Tsukachi, are you sure? The emaciated figure of Yagi Tashinori sat in the police's interview chair, his friend Tsukachi Naomasa sitting across from him. Between them was the bottles full of slime from Yagi's earlier capture. Night had fallen and the bars had come alive with nightlife, but the slime had still refused to stir. Investigators were agitated in the delay to convict and sentence, so they had called in medical to check how much longer the gelatinous figure was going to remain unconscious. The instruments may occasionally be off by some fractions in their readings, but coma isn't close enough to knock out for that sort of mistake to be made. And it's hardly your fault. A human with such a gelatinous makeup is extraordinarily rare. You have no way to tell how your punch would have affected him. But as it stands, he's not going to wake up as far as we can tell. It could have simply been a consequence of being blasted to tiny globs, or it could be the fault of his quirk. You're not to blame, no charges will be pressed. He simply doesn't have the life left in him to recover. The sludge villain was brain dead, and there was no foreseeable future where he woke up at all. All Might usually was better at gauging the power of his strikes, but he had overestimated this time, and the villain was paying the price. He may have been a villain, but no one deserved to be destroyed because of their actions. Yagi nodded and got up to leave. Tsukachi gently put his hand out to Yagi's shoulder, and the two looked each other in the eyes briefly before Yagi left. He was just so glad that he had saved the young man the villain had tried to kill, and didn't overestimate so grossly that he had wounded the boy as well. He had skipped the entrance exams to UA High, and he had never felt more confident in anything he had done before. Over the past few months, Midoriya had officially abandoned his dreams, but instead of becoming despondent like many had expected him to do, he only acted mature about the missed opportunity and took everyone's praise at his level-headed decision in stride. He seemed to do better in school, and despite Bakugou beating on him harder for not only being weak but being a pushover, Midoriya bounced back harder than he ever had before. It was a popular opinion that abandoning his dreams had been the best decisions of the young boy's life. They didn't see the broken resolve beneath his immaculate mask. Behind closed doors, Midoriya still cried at losing his entire life's goal. Behind closed doors, he felt weaker than ever, but he couldn't let anyone know how close he had been to losing himself. He couldn't let anyone feel the hatred and pain that he concealed beneath his smile. After a particularly bad confrontation with Bakugou, the day the latter had learned of Midoriya giving up, Midoriya was left on a bench in the park, jaw broken and body slack. He felt years of repressed anger and betrayal bubble under his skin, the adrenaline keeping him from slipping unconscious. Why was such a violent bully like Bakugou able to become a hero, and someone who only genuinely wanted to help people like Midoriya barred from his dreams? Why would people only sit by and watch as Bakugou abused the smaller green-haired boy? Even the teachers and authorities turned a blind eye. Did no one care that such a violent and troubled boy was going to be idolized by millions of young children world round? Midoriya let the anger flow through him, pelting question after question, as he crawled from the bench. The moment he hit the ground, he felt better, like a switch had been flipped. He glanced down and paled at what he saw. The ground beneath him was dry and cracked, the grass brown and wilting, a stark contrast from the lush green that encircled him. Frowning, he reached a hand out and placed it on another patch of ground, gasping as it wilted, and Midoriya felt his body relaxing. Crawling over to a tree, leaving a path of brown decay behind him, he slapped a hand onto it and instantly felt the relief flow through body, like he had woken up from a rejuvenating sleep. The moment he heard the crackling of dead wood, he jerked back to reality and rolled out of the way in time to avoid a falling branch. The tree itself was cracked and brown, the life having been sucked out of it. Dead leaves fell from the boughs, and it crackled in the wind as it swayed. It looked like death. When he looked back down at his body, it was almost entirely healed, only small bruises poking out here and there. He felt like he was going to be sick, but also felt better than he had in years. His arms and legs felt the sturdiness of the tree, and his heart felt the vitality of each green leaf, bursting with life. At the thought of life, his mind instantly sprung back to sludge villain who had supposedly weakened around him, and he did throw up. It had shown up on the news the next day. A villain who had fought All Might had succumbed to his injuries resulting from the interaction between quirks. He had been brought to the police station, and when he was unresponsive, he was pronounced DOA. Midoriya wanted to believe that the death was just a coincidence, and that the villain who had died was someone else entirely, but that was the only report on All Might that day, and if he had fought and captured more than one villain, the media would have eaten it up. Midoriya let it sink in. He wasn't even 15 years old and he had already killed someone. His mysterious quirk had simply laid dormant in him, or was never noticed by others, and the doctor had mistakenly diagnosed him as quirkless. He shook his head and pushed himself up. No quirk like his would have been able to have been undiagnosed, but if it had laid dormant in him, and only activated as he jumped from the 5th floor of his middle school, no one would have been the wiser. He had never been so close to death before, and his body would have acted without his conscious thought. Glancing around, he noted that there were no other people in the park as the sun set, and he meandered towards the beach in town. A majority of it was covered in junk and debris, but there were still valuable shores that people swam at. As he walked down the streets, his body protested minimally, bruises aching occasionally. But that was all, as though his jaw hadn't been wrenched from its hinges only a few minutes before. He ran the tips of his fingers over everything he could touch, seeing what he could steal life from, flowers and shrubs wilting under his touch. Bricks and stone didn't move though, so he figured only living things that produced life could have that life stolen from them. As he reached the shore, he glanced around. It was late, past sunset, and the only people there were in the water. He wandered over to a tide-pool and glancing around its contents, he reached in. There were small fish swimming around, snails and shellfish inhabiting the puddle. He let a snail slither onto his finger before pulled back out of the water. It showed no signs of dying, even though there were visible wounds still on Midoriya. He pondered for a moment before concentrating. He could almost hear the unearthly shriek as the snail started to twitch and spasm. He tried to shake it off, but the slime of the snail kept it secured. He started to hyperventilate as it shriveled up on his finger, until becoming still, the shell falling. Midoriya scrambled backwards, mind working in overdrive. He had killed something again, he had taken a life. It was only a snail, but it confirmed that he had killed the slimy villain who had attacked him before. It confirmed that Midoriya was now legally a villain. He choked up some tears before dashing from the beach. Midoriya Izuku really blossomed as the spring break before high school began. Since that day, he had slowly expanded his daily repertoire. In the morning, he ate breakfast, careful not to touch any fruits or other potentially living things with his fingers. He had shocking control over his quirk, but couldn't risk it. He had gotten into the only high school he had tested for. He knew he would. He had faith in his intelligence, much more than when he hung around Bakugou, so he had no reason to study for makeups during his free time. Bakugou himself hadn't even cared about the absence of his biggest annoyance, too proud of himself and boastful of his placement on the entrance exams to seek out Midoriya. Midoriya, of course, didn't complain. Maybe he once would have, lonely and desperate for attention, but he had come to his senses since then, and while he was still lonely, he preferred no attention and silence to abusive attention. His mother noticed how lively her son was becoming. He still jumped at loud noises and wilted at confrontation, but he smiled more. He came home with fewer bruises and clearer eyes. He had never told her directly, but she knew that the cause of his pain was his supposed friend. She could never hate the Bakugus, but it made her blood boil that Mitsuki and Masaru simply let their son bully hers. She didn't miss the way he wistfully stared at heroes, couldn't ignore the way he still wrote every detail in his notebooks, but as far as she could tell, he was happy. Izuku was still timid and cautious, but he had gone from a trembling boy afraid of his own shadow to a young man ready to enter the world. Inko was proud. It was shortly after the beginning of the start of the new school year that Midoriya began to falter in his convictions. He hadn't been confronted with yet another villain and hadn't met anyone nearly as willing to bully him in his new high school, electing for a high school on the other side of Mizudafu, where none of his old bullies went, but it was easy to see he was withdrawing into his shell. It began after the death of a UA student during a scheduled test. Azui Tiu, a sweet young girl who easily made friends wherever she went, had been killed protecting the smallest of the group, Mineta Minoru, from villains. The villain had grabbed a hold of her face, which was destroyed due to his quirk. Mineta declined to give an interview, as did the rest of the students, but All Might had privately said the girl's final guttural shrieks would be engraved in his nightmares forever. Her best friend, another hero in training from Isamu High, cried at her wake, opening up about her. She had helped her overcome her social fear of rejection and was the first person outside her family to be nice to her, unafraid of her serpentine head. The world was a duller place without her, and the entirety of UA mourned. In the wake of the attack, the media attacked anything that moved, ripping heroes to shred, whether they spoke positively or negatively of the handling of the situation. News stations were flooded with callers, and the only news that could be found was details on the attack. Midoriya had simply read one too many articles. But beneath his sullen attitude, Midoriya was furious. He had done plenty of research on the rising heroes of UA, and aside from Bakugou, Mineta was his least favorite. An unrepentant SXL deviant, he had been known in his middle school as the boy who was the perfect height to accidentally peek under skirts. Even some of the other students' social media expressed displeasure that Azui had been the victim and not Mineta. The fact that so many disgusting individuals had been let into the most prestigious school in Japan smudged their image to Midoriya. Mineta was disgusting in his habits and perversion. Bakugou was disgusting in his villainous behavior. Even though he was idolized and seen as incredibly heroic, even though he sympathized with the students, they were disgustingly willing to sacrifice another potential hero, someone who was supposed to be their co-worker and companion. It was the first time in his life that he didn't touch his hero notebooks the entire day. Midoriya had always watched the UA Sports Festival every year since he could remember. Some of his fondest memories were of him rooting for the pretty girl on the screen, Takayama Yu, too big for her opponents to knock away and too strong for her opponents to overpower. She later became Mount Lady, and Midoriya felt a strange sense of loyalty to her, having practically grown up a fan of hers. This year, though, was the year that Bakugou competed. Izuku didn't know how to feel as his mother excitedly chattered on the phone with Mitsuki about how her son would do. While he was excited to watch his childhood acquaintance beat all the others, he had watched him beat himself too many times too. feel any real convictions or excitement for the explosive boy. Some of the others, though, they were worth Midoriya's time. The perky gravity girl was a sweetheart, and the energetic redhead seemed like he could do no wrong. As his mother sat down on the couch next to him, they discussed their favorites and who bet on what. Midoriya picked out quite a few of the class that he disliked. He could writing a novel on why he hated Bakugou. Mineta was a disgusting pervert. Todoroki was a pompous elitist brat. Yaoyorozu wasn't a brat, but she was still pompous and full of herself. Jiru was rude and reminded him of Bakugou. Kaminari's quirk was hardly controlled and would sooner hurt an ally than an enemy. Shiro and Ishido got on his nerves only because they seemed to idolize Bakugou, and while Kirishima did too, the former could have easily been like Bakugou's lackeys from middle school, whereas Kirishima probably couldn't hate anyone. He liked the look of the silently smiling Kuda, who said little but no one appeared to dislike. Ida may have been a bit stiff and too elite for Midoriya's tastes, but Ingenium was an incredible hero, and Midoriya trusted him to be a good influence on his younger brother. Tokoyami said little, but his anatomy was fascinating, and his companion was even more so. His mother didn't dislike any of them other than Bakugou by default, but by the end of the first trial, neither of them cared for Todoroki. He rang too similar to Bakugou, so insistent on becoming a hero, caring little for others' efforts. He had a powerful quirk, was the son of the number 2 hero, and got into UA on recommendations. There was little doubt he was a class above the other freshmen, yet he did little to help them, and regarded them with an icy stare at best. Some of the others turned out to be interesting. Midoriya enjoyed watching Mineta's usage of his quirk. He was a disgusting little rat, but the versatility of the spheres explained how he had gotten into the school in the first place. The invisible girl, Hagakure, who had no advantage aside from her cover, still managed to be impressive, and Midoriya wondered what kind of physique she was hiding under her see-through skin. The girl from the support class had a plethora of incredible gadgets, and Midoriya found himself taking a liking to her laughable personality. During the intermission between events, the Midoriyas busied themselves preparing lunch. Inko made sure to take the day of the sports festival off every year, and her boss was lenient because she was practically a single mother, having raised Izuku alone for most of his life. They had started an annual tradition of making their favorite snack foods for lunch and chowing down on a dinner of champions. Once Izuku was old enough to cook for himself, the two would make each other's favorites to eat during the third event. Inko would prepare the best katsudon the city had to offer, while Izuku had acquired a talent at making ebisoba. They paired it was a light miso broth, and the two let the day wash by them, without a trouble in the world. And despite having his dreams crushed only a few months earlier, despite moving into a new school with no friend, though from no friends, Izuku spared no expense in his mother's ebisoba. It warmed Inko's heart how resilient her boy had become. Barely a day ago, though, Midoriya found himself sulking alone through the lunch party. No bullies had followed him to his new high school, but his reputation followed him where he went. Soon enough he was an outcast once again, and while people were willing to at least talk to him, the most conversation he got was asking someone what the homework was. He had grown up beaten and bullied, so this was a nice change, but Midoriya was still terribly lonely. Having covered a majority of the pro heroes in Japan, Midoriya began a new book on the quirks of his classmates. One girl's quirk produced fragrance from the keratin her body produced, and she always smelled incredible. Another girl had eyes that acted as flashlights, and could be any color she wanted, though it made it very hard for her to sleep properly. A pair of identical twins had matching quirks, and could instantly switch places via teleportation. The two boys even dressed similarly to confuse everyone, and Midoriya still wasn't quite sure who was who. And though no one would ever scare him like Bakugou Katsuki could, when two gossipy girls got their hands on his newest notebook, full of the quirks of everyone in the school, his blood ran cold. He had never moved faster, and while the two girls shrieked with delight as the quirkless loser chased them around, Midoriya could feel plan after plan formulate in his head. He would move to Australia. If the wildlife there didn't kill him, then he won. The second girl, Ibuki, who could elongate her eyes and often peered over shoulders at phone, was easily able to read the book, which was practically suspended in mid-air. The first girl, Wakai, could slow down time on small items she had recently touched, jamming people's perceptions as she copied homeworks and cheated on exams. Midoriya didn't want to do anything drastic, but he could feel his pulse thundering when they turned to the entry of his classmate Endo Toshiro. Endo was a boy who could have easily gotten into the hero course, but simply didn't have the drive necessary for a hero. He was laid back and relaxed. His quirk, Time Out, let him freeze anyone who touched him in place for a short period of time. He was strong and charismatic, but wanted to become a therapist and yoga instructor instead of stressing over hero work. Midoriya was hopefully head over heels for the handsome young man. He was one of the few who didn't ostracize Midoriya, and the two were on very good terms. Though they didn't exactly hang with the same people, and never really talked, Endo was more than happy to cheer up Midoriya after he was victimized. The book detailed as much, explaining the relaxing properties of his quirk in depth. Whenever he froze an opponent, adrenaline levels were dropped and the person was overtaken with a sense of peace and quiet. He oftentimes used it on himself and his friends when they chilled together, and he was a favorite of a few of the students who had panic attacks or anxiety disorders. If the girls found out about his crush, he was ruined, and not even Australia would save him from the humiliation. He acted without thinking and reached out for Ibuki's eyeball, making contact. Lightly activating his quirk, he felt as her eye dried out and she yelped in pain, contracting both of her eyes back into her head. This startled Wakai into releasing the book, which Midoriya caught with ease. Both of them glared at him, Ibuki in stinging annoyance and Wakai in indignation. The look quickly switched to shock as the presumed quirkless boy rapidly dissolved the book in his hands, pages turning to dust. Not a day went by without Midoriya practicing usage of his quirk. He had no doubt that his mother would be much stronger if she had practiced with her quirk, but nowadays she could only pull the occasional towel, plates, or utensils. He was determined not to take his gift for granted. He started with small things, flowers and mosquitoes that landed on him to bite him, absorbing the life force. He found that it helped him retain his youthful appearance and keep his body in peak condition. He graduated from that, claiming the lives of large insects that he could catch in berry bushes on the sides of the road. He hadn't been using his quirk for long, but he felt like the world slowed down around him, like molasses on his skin, smooth and sticky. The life forces that he took in weren't necessary to keep him alive, and were instead used to keep him young and vital. He then experimented with different levels of his quirk, learning that it was more akin to stealing the remaining time the things had to live. He could tap flower blossoms and make them bloom early by absorbing the few hours between that moment and when it bloomed. He never ate an underripe fruit again, watching as bananas yellowed in his grasp. He dragged knives down his skin and jumped in the waters at the beach, watching as he siphoned life from the plankton and bacteria in the cold brine. He even went so far as to cut halfway through his wrist, blood spurting everywhere and ruining his clothing. He had to kill 2 saplings and a squirrel to live, but as long as he could kill things around him, he felt unbeatable. He found that his quirk extended to biological materials such as would mulch in paper and cotton threads and shirts, working so long as there were hints of life hidden in the mutilated cells. He could fray shirts at the seams and cause books to crumble in his hands. It was a destructive quirk that couldn't help anyone but himself, but Midoriya was so happy he wasn't a useless Deku that he didn't care. He didn't even care as the girls' eyes bugged out of their heads as he activated his quirk and dissolved the notebook in front of their eyes. He didn't care if other people knew he had a quirk, but that was his strength now, his secret. He may look and act the part of the useless Deku he once was, but a single touch from him could kill. He later was disappointed in himself for destroying so much of his hard-spent time, which is why he sulked, but had relished the look of confusion and awe in the girl's eyes. He was upset he acted so rashly in disposal of evidence, was upset that he had been so careless as to let the 2 girls get his notebook. He wasn't upset that he damaged Ibuki's eye permanently, and when she came into school with glasses 2 days later, he didn't even apologize, though neither girl suspected the momentary touch had ruined her eyesight. He wasn't upset that the 2 girls spread rumors about him and how he had overpowered them both in a fit to manically destroy his own notebook. He had a quirk. It wasn't flashy, and it did more harm than good if you weren't Midoriya Izuku, but that doesn't matter. He felt powerful. By the time the second event had begun, Midoriya was munching on homemade shrimp chips while his mother brought out 2 cans of soda for them to enjoy. The cavalry battle was intense, and both Midoriyas found themselves shouting at the screen. Normally this would have concerned or annoyed the neighbors, but all of them were in similar situations. Uraraka had teamed up with Tokoyami, the support girl, and the young woman who had replaced Azuitsu. Her name was Anna Mikhailov and had transferred in from a Russian school. Her quirk let her attract any number of objects to her, which could not be stopped by anything. She almost got into the hero course, but lost points for accidentally injuring multiple other participants and damaging multiple buildings on the testing grounds. She was kept on standby in case a student dropped or was expelled, and sat high and mighty, a star of the general education division. They worked well together, Mikhailov ensnaring the headbands. Uraraka easily disabled other teams when they got close enough, and Tokoyami was an incredible defense. The support girl, Hatsum, kept a watch as the rider, her vision quirk giving the team a superior sense of the battlefield. Her gadgets were immensely handy as well, saving them from multiple sour situations. Todoroki's team was their biggest adversaries, Yaoyorozu disrupting Mikhailov by creating countless objects that became scattered through the field. Ingenium's younger brother provided excellent mobility while the electric blonde Dits managed to keep their flanks cleared. They had managed to grab a hold of Bakugou's headband, the first place from last round, and Team Bakugou madly dashed to get their prize back. Ashido and Siro made for a terrifying team, tripping up every other team, while Kirishima provided a practical battering rod. In the end, Team Todoroki managed to keep the lead, though Team Bakugou had a majority of the other points in the game, headbands and hair stolen by Siro's sticky elbows. Team Mikhailov placed third, scraping by with 3 headbands, but Mikhailov herself was forced to withdraw due to the side effects of her quirk. If she attracted too many items, her organs began to attract each other and jumbled her guts, causing intense internal bruising. She had been cleared to fight again, but opted out since she didn't want to risk further damage. Fourth place was nabbed by Team Shinso, who was the only team with a headband, having managed to keep their own the entire game through. Ojiro and Shouta both withdrew from the battle, though their reason was omitted from airing, and all 3 empty places were eventually given to Team Tetsu, which had placed 5th. Hananuki Jizu, Shizuki Ibara, and Tetsu replaced them. The third and final event of the sports festival was always Midoriya's favorite, and he placed mock bets with his mother on the students to see if their favorites could make it in. As much as he hated to admit it, he believed that Bakugou would at least make it to the second round, though he hoped Kirishima's quirk was enough to beat him past there. He anticipated all 3 recommended students to advance far, though he wasn't sure whether Hananuki or Todoroki had the upper hands. It was clear that Todoroki favored the solid ice that came from his mother, but it was obviously weak to Hananuki's quirk as it couldn't hold him. He was pleasantly surprised when Hananuki was effortlessly defeated by the general education student. No one could quite place his quirk, but the two simply talked for a moment before Hananuki simply walked out of the arena. The crowd was in an uproar as to what had just happened. Most of the quirks of the Gen Ed department were unknown, and it wasn't even mandatory for the other students to know of their classmates' quirks. Present Mike, who was announced the tournament as usual, was digging through files madly, though he never reported back what he found. Eraserhead, who sat next to him in the announcer box, mumbled some soft observations, which was quick to quiet the other. Shiro Hanta had the upper hand on Todoroki for almost an entire second before being encased in ice. The flashes that Kaminari released were brilliant and strong, but were easily blocked by the non-conductive vines of Shiozaki, who easily took the victory. Hatsum could have probably won if she had tried enough, but instead took her time as a paid programming segment, and while it was a bit pointless, it was a funny enough break from the serious tone of the fights. Though Ashido's quirk was entirely outclassed by the long-range blast of naval laser, she was deft on her feet and managed to make Aoyama slip up on her acid, making him lose control over his laser. She was quick to overpower him in close combat, even using her horns as blunt objects. Midoriya was once again surprised as Yaoyorozu, Class 1 as other recommended student, was brutally mauled by Dark Shadow and forced from the ring with little resistance. Midoriya almost pitied her at the look of self-doubt and disappointment in her eyes, and decided that he had misjudged her earlier. The next match, a mirror match of quirks, was an absolute shitstorm, only decided after Kirishima managed to outstamina Tetsutetsu due to metal fatigue. As predicted, Uraraka put up a valiant fight worthy of a hero, but Bakugou simply demolished her when her grand plan failed. Once again Midoriya was shocked at Shinsu's second victory. The battle had been going poorly for him, Todoroki sparing no formalities, and the entire time he had been madly dodging chunks of ice. Finally both of them froze, and a shadow passed over Todoroki's face. Neither participant was mic'd, but it was clear that the talkative Shinso had struck a chord. His left side flared up in a brilliant red, angry and malevolent, before flickering out not a second later. And then, just as Hananuki from the previous match, he simply walked out of the arena. Endeavor's shouts of anger could be heard throughout the entire arena, and even back home, Midoriya shivered in his seat. After that shock, the little ingenium was sure to beat Shiozaki, and though he had trouble for some time, struggling to dodge the vines sprouting from the ground, he managed to push her out of the rink, screaming. Ashido put up more of a fight than Yaoyorozu had, but it was clear that Dark Shadow was only selectively corporeal, and her acid made no dent in the Amber figure. Bakugou once again secured victory, though Kirishima had certainly put up more of a fight. In the end his skin wasn't enough to hold up against blast after blast, and he fell, bloody and burnt. Both Midoriyas were shocked to watch as Bakugou acknowledged Kirishima's strength begrudgingly. By now a cult-like following of the purple-haired wonder from Gen Ed had sprung up on every social platform, people live blogging about the common man's hero. No Gen Ed student had ever made it so far before in history, and Shinso smashed record after record as he took Ida out of the rink as well, though his time it was much more messy. Shinso was surprisingly agile and live, and though Ida outsped him in every manner, he couldn't land a single touch on his opponent. Eventually a telltale darkness spread over his face from whatever Shinso had said, and Ida charged at him yelling. However, instead of hitting Shinso like planned, his body locked up and he tripped over his legs, moving too fast to instantly stop. He barreled out of the arena, and was brought to medical after he hit the wall. The second match was a terrifying show of darkness and explosions. A shadow thrived in the cover of night, but Tokoyami still put up one hell of a fight, Dark Shadow taking the brunt of every explosion. He might have even outlasted Bakugou in terms of quirk usage, Midoriya knowing that Bakugou's quirk was hell on his shoulders and back, but Bakugou managed to pin the other boy down by the beak. And so, it wound up with a general education kid facing off against the boy who had scored highest on the hero entrance exams. It seemed like it would naturally be no contest, but the young man with the unknown quirk had defeated two recommended students and the younger brother of a high-ranking pro hero, and no one knew how to counter him. Midoriya supposed that even if someone did, Bakugou would never learn from them, preferring to die than ask for help. And so it unwound, a show of explosives, Shinso unable to dodge every single blast. He wove and dodged as well as he could, Bakugou chasing after him. Bakugou was getting into the fight, and was clearly becoming agitated at how well a Gen Ed student was holding up against him. But Shinso mirrored his agitation, something having happened between his last fight and this one to sour his mood. His face looked almost blank, but his eyebrows were visibly furrowed and his eyes were cold and hard. Right as it looked grim, Bakugou froze. Midoriya rocketed up and screamed with everything he had as his normal scowl fell into a blank expression, and he followed in the previous three fighters' footsteps, escorting himself out of the ring. Shinso Hitoshi was the first general education student in history to win the annual UA Sports Festival. The podium rose, with Shinso standing on top in first place. He was beaming brighter than anything Midoriya had ever seen before, and Bakugou, with his hands restrained and GG secured to restrain him from excessive swearing, glared daggers at Shinso, looking ready to kill. Midoriya felt a dark thrill in his chest at the pained expression on Bakugou's face. He wanted to see it again. Izuku sat on his bed, shaking as tears flowed down his face. His hand tore at his hair, feeling the raw patches of scalp, and let out a shaky sob. Sniffling, he wiped his nose on his sleeve and thanked every deity he could that his mother was still at work. A stray thought in the back of his head noted how he should technically be in school as well. He laughed hysterically, eyes wide in shock as he rocked back and forth, curled into a fetal position. He had killed someone. Not to say he hadn't already killed someone, considering the slime villain and the damage he left in his wake, but he had really killed someone this time. He could have simply weakened them, broken out of their grasp, but he pushed farther, watching as the light faded from the man's eyes. He had been assaulted in an alleyway as he walked home, confronted near the same tunnel where he had almost lost his life. It started as a simple mugging, the man who towered over him gripping at Izuku's wrists, touch blistering skin. Izuku sobbed as he tried to struggle away, stuttering how he had nothing to give, he just wanted to return home. That was where the situation had rapidly turned south. The man had grinned a Cheshire grin, telling Midoriya he could pay with other methods. He reached down and began to unbuckle his belt, and Izuku panicked. He began to drain at the other man's life force, healing while his skin bubbled and popped. He had noticed and growled in agitation, shoving a hand down Izuku's pants to try and subdue the boy. Midoriya reacted purely in pain and instinct, Quirk reaching out and yanking too much life off the other. He collapsed, hands still caught in the Izuku's uniform, flaccid pee-pee hanging from open jeans. Izuku lashed out, still in panic mode, first connecting with his jaw with a sickening crack. His brain was in overdrive, removing the body's self-imposed limits on strengths, and he saw the bones grinding and breaking. The man shrieked in pain and fell back, landing painfully on his back. Izuku lunged at him, hands outstretched and ready to strike. His open palm landed on the man's face, 2 fingers digging into a soft eyeball. It popped, liquid seeping down his face and coating Izuku's fingers. His other one slammed into the man's ribs, hearing the telltale grinding of breaking bones. The man began to sob and beg for mercy, but Izuku wasn't in his right mind. He wasn't seeing a potential RPST and mugger under him anymore, not just some old stranger who had intended to ruin his life, but it was Bakugou, face twisted in the pain and surprised Izuku and drank up on television. It was the faces of Ibuki and Wakai, who had been so close to demolishing Izuku's precarious self-confidence and social life when they had stolen his notebook. It was Bakugou's lackeys, and he tore at their quirks, wings and fingers shattering under his force. Soon the man was unconscious under his fists, and Izuku realized what had done. The man's breathing was steady but shallow, lung probably filling with blood if the drips from his mouth were anything to judge. Izuku panicked again, terrified about what would happen if someone found out what he had done. In a moment of uncertainty, he reached out to the man, activating his quirk. The man's wounds healed instantly, tinged with the green rot of infection, but Izuku kept going. Soon his skin was sagging, wrinkled and cold. His hair fell out in clumps and his limbs shrivel up, bones creaking under the rapid shifting. He had killed the slime villain. How different was this? When he was done, the body had already begun to rot, flesh falling off bone, skin a morbid white. Izuku took one look at what he had done and ran. That had been a week ago, and Izuku was still shaking when he woke up from nightmares where the man's body didn't die, and the decaying, rotting corpse forced itself onto him. Izuku's eyes dried out fast, images of the grown man walking away from the young boy's body haunting him whenever he blinked. Inko had questioned him, concerned that something was wrong. This was an Izuku she had never seen before, bags under his eyes and hunched motionless as a cadaver. She tried to be insistent but kind, hugging her son close and letting him cry, but he never opened up to her. Izuku didn't want to burden his mother with the details on how he kept slipping up and hurting people with his quirk, and by the end of the month, he was back to a cautious normal. He still jumped at physical contact and took a different route home, but he looked as okay as he was going to get in the public eye. And soon he found his dreams taking yet another turn. Now it was Bakugou under his fingers, wailing as his life was ripped away from him. It was Mineta and his GRPG fingers. It was the villain who had killed the frog girl, eyes full of contempt. He found himself plagued with thoughts of the murder. The body had been found 2 days later, barely recognizable. He was only identified through dental records, as all the DNA on his body had already decayed beyond salvation. Izuku thanked his quirk that they couldn't find any of his DNA on the body, less concerned about the life he had taken and more concerned about being pinned as a villain himself. The police were in a state of hysteria as they tried to figure out what had happened. The victim hadn't even been missing for 48 hours when he had been found, and that wasn't enough time for the body to have ended up in such a state. It was obvious that the killer had meant to end the man's life, but their quirk was unknown, and their motives were shrouded in mystery. Even after the man's attempted RPE was brought to light, molecular specimen composition found inside the urethra and clothing undamaged, the police only showed the victim in a sympathetic light. It made Izuku sick. He had been sexually assaulted and almost raped. The man who he had killed was a villain who lost his life while Izuku defended himself, and while he had pushed farther than necessary, Izuku was still the victim here. The man didn't deserve any pity for dying, not from citizens, and especially not from the heroes and police who were investigating the scene. Izuku stopped paying attention to the news after that. He was halfway through the first term of his first year in high school when UA was attacked again. This time it was at a training camp, though the perpetrators were the same, the League of Villains, and they had taken a hostage. Bakugou Katsuki had been kidnapped and was being held against his will. It was only at this revelation that Midoriya laughed at how far he had fallen from grace. He was happy that Bakugou had been kidnapped. He was happy that his childhood bully was being given the short end of the stick in the hero world. Where he had once longed to be a hero, he was now rooting for the villains. He had become disgusted with the upcoming heroes of the next generation, and only wanted to see Bakugou and those like him in pain. He wasn't just going to be pinned as a villain, he mused, he really had turned quite evil. He had been practicing his quirk daily, but with his newest revelation, Izuku realized he had no idea the extent at which he could affect humans. He had killed 2, sure, but one of them had been a gelatinous slime, and the both were panic kills. He didn't know how strong his quirk would be while he was fully aware of his actions. Even as he thought back on his actions, he could feel his skin crawling, years of good morality telling him to turn himself in, but he refused. He was only beginning, and if he wanted to see his torturers suffer, he was going to have to SCK up his fears and get on with it. A week after the unsolved murder of the man who decayed too fast, the body of schoolgirl Wakai Hinako turned up in the dumpster behind her school. Her body was rotting and decrepit, clothing torn and tearing. The dumpster itself was in a similar state, metal rusting and garbage mulchy and soft. Izuku had discovered that his quirk did, in fact, work on non-biological surfaces, but they took much longer to age and decay. Certain things such as glass and stone required Izuku to expend energy of his own to age it instead of absorbing energy like usual. Izuku was satisfied with his work, even if he jumped every time he heard the name Wakai. The school held a service for the girl, and her best friend Ibuki mourned, face broken and teary. The school was closed down the next day, and when it reopened, Ibuki was missing. She had transferred out promptly, her parents worried for her mental health. Though his mind was disgusted with himself, Izuku took a sick sense of pride in his work. Soon the victims began to pop up, each more confusing and repulsive than the last. A young man in his early 30s was found dead in his apartment, body rotting on the stairs. Police theorized he had fallen and without proper help, died of his injuries. A middle-aged woman was found with holes all over her body, fist-sized chunks missing. The edges of the craters were rotten and withered, as though only specific parts of her were aging. A trio of gang members were found in a back alley, each one's face rotted out of their skull. They had guns and volatile quirks, clearly intent on committing a crime, but had chosen the wrong victim and paid for it. Soon there were heroes on the streets patrolling for the murder, dubbed Eternum by the police. There was no set pattern of victims, no set MO, no visible locational base, and everyone was left baffled at each crime scene. Soon Izuku had more and more notebooks of hero schedules, noting when each hero agency in the area patrolled what areas and who they sent. He noted how certain ones avoided certain areas, while others strayed from their usual locations on certain times. It was incredibly useful information, and he used it to strike fear into the hearts of those he hated. He finally put it to good use when he struck out at a pro hero, killing them before they could even touch Izuku. He had set it up cleverly, feigning victim to a villain attack when Mount Lady passed him. He had trouble using his quirk on himself, as all the energy he absorbed simply was used to repair his body, but he managed, creating 2 ugly craters in his shoulder and ribcage. The vain woman was quick to approach him, assessing the situation and asking if he was okay. He was quick to turn on her, touch rotting at her hero costume. She recoiled in fear before realizing who it was that she was facing. Troubled that the culprit was just a developing child, she made the fatal mistake of trying to reason with him. Even as she grew in size, Izuku's grip drained at her body, and soon she was just an abnormally large lump of flesh and bone, dead on the side of the road. Midoriya used to like the talent Mount Lady had displayed, even rooting for her when she was competed in the UA Sports Festival, but she had fallen farther than Midoriya. She was a conceited woman who used her SXL appeal to get out of legal fees and avoid lawsuits. She treaded on those beneath her as she climbed to the top. She was no hero. Izuku had grown accustomed to the blood at the scenes of his crimes, carrying 2 sharp kitchen knives with him just in case. He grew to like the screams of pain of his victims, reveling in the power he held over them. He would imagine his enemies on the faces of random people he plucked off the streets to kill, while memorizing the facial contortions of the victims he hand-picked because of their disgusting morality. Because of this, he took great pleasure in rotting the skin of Mount Ladies but in her formerly gorgeous assets now stinking heaps of rot. The media was appalled at the fall of a favorite hero. Izuku silently laughed as he watched the funeral broadcast nationwide. It was purely by coincidence that Izuku found the headquarters of the League of Villains. He had only meant to patrol that night, seek out a stronger person to fight. But before he knew it, he was surrounded by a thick purple-black mist. It seems we have a new arrival, Shigaraki. What do you want to do with him? Izuku had taken to his role as a villain surprisingly easily. He was still jumpy, nervous, and scared of people turning on him, but it had gone from fear of abuse to fear of discovery. Though polar opposites, no one noticed the change in behavior. There really wasn't much of a change in behavior to notice in the first place. He still wrote in his notebooks, but instead of details on heroes, though he still kept up on the hero world, he wrote down patrol schedules, details about how he could sneak around unseen, biographies about potential victims. He never let people look at his notebooks, but few people tried after Wakai died. He still jumped when people got his attention, and shied away from the social spotlight, but few people were willing to give it to him in the first place. Where he had once wanted to be a hero who gave people courage, he found himself shrinking from notice, doing his best to blend into the background. He didn't want to comfort people anymore. He had too many years of needing comfort that never came to care for others and their uncaring stares. He even designed his own villain suit. He was still a fan of All Might, admiring the heroic deeds he did, but he now knew that that sort of life was not one he was going to live. So instead, he designed his villain costume as a mockery of All Might. White rabbit ears stuck up from the hood secured on his head, mocking All Might's bangs. They functioned as radar, antenna, and sensors to receive sound waves, wires leading to a headset that Izuku wore to keep up the hood and maximize his perception. He covertly obtained the tech from some underhanded criminals who he threatened, who had in turn bought the rights from a UA support corps student, some girl with a genius inventing mind. His vest was a black and white outfit with gears and clock numbers stitched in bloody red. Underneath it he wore a simple green long-sleeve shirt interwoven with Kevlar and nanocarbon threads, so dark it was almost black. From his neck dangled a pocket watch, a platinum timepiece with diamond-studded hands. It served more as a bragging right than a practical usage, but Izuku treasured it nonetheless. His pants were steampunk in design, 3 utility belt hanging off his right hip. On his left thigh there was an ever-ticking clock. Izuku found it easiest to gauge his quirk when the clock itself showed how much time was passing. It was connected to his leg via a mechanical panel he had installed himself. The actual installation had been terribly painful, but it was easy enough to find a quack doctor with a healing quirk that he could bribe to oversee the surgery. Now when Izuku hooked up his villain costume, he could watch as the clock sped forward, helping him see how strong he was using his quirk. His boots was iron-lined and had heel spikes, which aided in close combat. He wore gloves that exposed his palm and the upper half of his pointer finger. On the back of each there was embroidery, which had commissioned himself from a well-known villain tailor, with a quirk similar to best genus Quirk. It had required a favor that Midoriya didn't like to think about, considering his villain debut, but the fabric worker had considered the gloves a gift afterwards, and now Izuku had a starting credit line in the villain world. Over the past few months, Izuku began to train himself rigorously, changing his diet and habits to help him build the body necessary to kill his enemies. His legs were to be feared, and if were someone else, he'd find his thighs alluringly powerful. As it stood, he hadn't quite reached a level of self-acceptance where he could admit he was attractive. He opted for an undercut partway through his first high school term, the shorter sides being easier to hide under his hood. He tied his hair back into a small ponytail as well, which was easily concealed when he gelled it back. On his right wrist sat 2 watches, one a stopwatch and the other a high-tech device with many features. It helped to measure his own vitals and in times of murder, could show when the victim was dead. On his left he donned a tool wristlet, letting him break and enter with ease. He was no professional spy though, and when his tool kits failed, a good kick usually solved the problem. He had claimed 2 more heroes' lives since his debut, and 1 villain's as well. He hadn't wanted to kill Backdraft, but without the ability to counteract the liquid water imprisoning him, Izuku's hand was forced. After that he was sure to keep an oxygen mask with him at all time. The second hero wasn't even on Izuku's books, some wannabe who had lusted after Mount Lady. The villain he had killed was an electric user who had been associated with the League of Villains, and was one of the few to escape the USJ incident unscathed. It had been his fault that the students couldn't call for help, it had been his fault that a legitimately good person like Azuitsuyu had been killed. Izuku didn't feel bad as the man shrieked in pain and writhed beneath his grasp. He took some teeth as a trophy from that kill. He even went so far as to obtain a golden chain that he attached to yet another pocket watch, which he kept in his pocket. This watch was frozen on midnight for the rest of eternity, a crude picture of All Might scratched into the glass. Izuku opened it from time to time, during his missions, to admire his handiwork. He made a fitting killer white rabbit indeed. Eternum, as he had been so dubbed by the media, was only patrolling a small area, satisfied with his bounty for the night, when he had seen shadows moving unnaturally. This would generally indicate another villain in the area, or a hero waiting to pounce, but the moonlight was too bright, and it was clear that no one was in the area. Curiosity getting the best of him, he followed the moving black shadow into a run-down building and through the halls of what looked to be a mall that barely kept itself running. A young man stood next to the entrance of a bar, hand covering his face. Izuku almost thought it was the man's own hand until he saw the severed wrist. Shuddering, he walked closer. It was a mistake he wasn't soon to repeat. Before he could react, the black mist he had mistaken for a shadow swirled around him. He lashed out, drained it of life energy, but he touched nothing, hand warping to collide with a wall. Izuku hissed in pain as his joints were jammed against the brick surface, scraping and bleeding. He tried to twist his hand around in an attempt to aid the mist, but he was stuck, the portal having shrunk too small for him to turn. The other man with hands on his face, Shigaraki apparently, hummed, "Eternum, I believe?" Izuku grimaced, although his slight frown was the only thing visible beneath the shadow of his hood. "And what's it to you, a hole?" He tensed instantly, realizing how stupid his wording had been. Last time he was at the mercy of a villain, he was easily able to kill them, whereas this situation rendered him powerless. He didn't know the extent of the black mist quirk he was surrounded with, and whatever quirk the man standing over him had, it was dangerous. Izuku could sense as much. He wasn't expecting when Shigaraki burst out laughing. Oh, he had attitude. "I never really wanted a supporting character, but if I had to pick one, a comedic relief would be ideal. Kurogiri, I think we should keep him, he's more interesting than the sheet that Stain dragged in." Kurogiri, the man made of black mist, grunted. "Well, Eternum, it seems you've at least appealed to our young leader. He's been needing the reprieve." From Toga and Udabi's team. "They are useful but dash. It's always Stain this and All Might that. It's annoying, so annoying. I don't care what they want, They're here to serve me and sensei. The man began to scratch at his neck and Izuku briefly wondered if he was okay. Their little plan went off without a hitch, but our prisoner won't let us complete his quest. He won't listen? At that Izuku stiffened up, catching the interest of both villains. Their prisoner was obviously Bakugou, but Izuku wasn't sure he wanted to face him just yet. He left a sour taste in Izuku's mouth last time they had talked, and considering he was the biggest reason Izuku had become Eternum, Izuku knew he wouldn't simply walk away unscathed, be it physically or emotionally. Kurogyari stretched out his mist and gently held Shigaraki's arm away from his neck. Shigaraki, you know that Sensei wants you to stop hurting yourself so much. As for you Eternum, what Shigaraki wants to say is that he hopes for you to join us. We've seen your work, and your rise to infamy must have taken considerable talent and intelligence. We would benefit each other with our teamwork. Izuku briefly considered it. So you want me to join you as a fresh mind, in the hopes that we can break Bakugou? Kurogyari didn't miss the near admission of Bakugou's nickname, but didn't mention it. Izuku smiled. I'd like that. I've been meaning to kill him for some time now. Shigaraki smiled, a sadistic stretch of skin that more resembled a scar than a smile. You sound like someone better than the other supporting characters we've worked with. I think I'll like working with you. He stuck out his hand, one finger carefully retracted. Izuku grabbed it and shook, confident in his decision. The doodle that ran around the edge of his notes had begun to encroach on the neat lines of characters. It should have annoyed Izuku, but as he ran his fingers along the lines, ignoring the lesson the teacher was droning about, he found he didn't care. Each spiral, each curve represented someone from his new family. Large bursts of angles, 5-starred points and inky black smudges represented Shigaraki. He was volatile and childish, even more than Izuku who was the youngest member. The lines curled up to small parts of the paper that Izuku had aged, representing his quirk. There were swirls of ink and graphite, blending together. They enwreathed everyone else's symbols protectively. Izuku wasn't quite sure whether they were supposed to be mustard or kurogyri. Toga's drawing was all jagged edges surrounding a chaotic swirl of ink, bundled up like loose yarn. He purposely pressed too hard when making her marks, letting the ink gather instead of absorb into the paper, bleeding down the white surface. Dabi's was much more compact and subtle. Boxes stacked on top of each other, filled in with intense pencil. Sunbursts of blank white where he had erased were on the inside of each box. There were thick lines, strong and defined, that barred from top to bottom of the page. They were muscular, and Izuku had decided early on that he liked the man. The two hit it off, and Izuku's lithe style of fighting gave Muscular a fun challenge. Magna and Spinner shared a symbol, with how the two seemed to interact. Both of them would have hated him for it, but the sharp triangles for Spinner and the blunt rectangles for Magna complemented each other design-wise. Moonfish was Izuku's least favorite teammate. He was creepy and couldn't hold a decent conversation. He got a simple symbol, spindly tracks running from character to character. Izuku barely noticed them, but considering how strongly he disliked the man, it wasn't surprising. There were compact circles of darkness scattered throughout the page for Mr. Compress, and if Izuku was a better artist, he would have drawn the little images of compressed items on them. He was working on twice, repeating swirls on either side of the page when the class ended. He hadn't really absorbed anything the teachers had said, and his notes reflected that. Shigaraki had once belittled him for muttering so much and keeping physical notes that he carried around anywhere, saying that he'd just end up giving away his association with the League. Izuku was quick to reassure him that no one could understand him when he muttered, and in the event that someone tried to peek into his notes, which no one ever did, he'd simply destroy them. Now that he had someone other than his notes to turn to, he was less lonely and didn't have to retreat into his shell. As he walked out of the room, mind swirling with ideas, he slid his books into his locker. He usually kept all of his notebooks on him or at home, in case he wanted to write down something he saw. He slid off his socks and stowed those in his locker as well. Today was a special day, and he had to be prepared. Today was the day Midoriya Izuku died. He almost laughed out loud when he thought of it, preferring just to huff in amusement. He wasn't actually going to die. He'd sooner drain the life from everyone in his classroom than die. He hadn't even gotten to properly interrogate Bakugou yet. No, Izuku wasn't going to actually die, but to the world outside, Midoriya Izuku's poor son would soon be no more. It had been Sensei's idea initially, proposed right after Izuku revealed his real name. Izuku and Shigaraki had been hesitant at first, though for very different reasons, but Kurogiri was quick to assuage their fears. Shigaraki didn't want to waste his inventory and resources on a single weak member, but Kurogiri had been quick to point out how bad guys always used the weak as prey, and would hit the heroes hard. Izuku was worried about his mother and what would become of her afterwards, but had been easily reminded that he had sacrificed his right to be there for his mother when he had voluntarily killed his would-be Arpst. He had been living on borrowed time, a villain in hiding, and it was up. Izuku had been the one who solidified the plan. The League had taken him in presuming that he was a child who was weak and could be guided into the life they led it. They were instead presented with a cynical boy who had loved the world and only been hurt in return. They were given a boy who wanted to see love and friendship burn, a boy who wanted to hurt others because it made him feel good. They were pleasantly surprised with the results, but Eternum had made it clear that anyone who toyed with him or thought themselves important would be getting a brutal beating. He had only needed to kill 2 minor villains who doubted the boy to make everyone take him seriously. Bakugou had been kidnapped almost a month ago, but showed no signs of breaking. Izuku's identity and reason for becoming a villain was being kept a secret for the time being, a potential trump card they hadn't felt the need to use. Bugs had been placed in the Midoriya and Bakugou household to keep the League updated on their movements. Everyone Bakugou had interacted with in his time at UA was being tailed. It hadn't yielded much information, but one thing was for certain. Bakugou Katsuki was not happy. His classmates tread carefully around him, and even if he had a friend in Kirishima, it was obvious that the other students were wary to even mention his name. The teachers didn't like his attitude, and when he had interned with an agency, it was made clear that no one wanted him for who he was. Everyone wanted him how he could change, and the years of self-ostracization were beginning to weigh on the boy. It filled Izuku with a dark glee, and he hadn't hesitated to show it. In the week leading up to Izuku's death, Toga had found the boy more gossipy than ever before. They planned his future makeovers together, giggling at their tales of kills and tortures. Dabi had taken to the young boy like the little brother he never had, and he and Muscular were both peppier from Izuku's company. Even Shigaraki found himself motivated from Izuku's presence, though that mostly went into beating his personal video game records instead of productive goals. When the day had finally come, Izuku could barely contain his glee, instead using his energy to create the beautiful drawings in his notes. He headed for the entrance of the building and waited for a while, just as he had in the previous months. He had to make sure his behavior didn't seem out of sorts. Finally, he felt his phone buzz, and he allowed himself a slight smile. The League group chat instantly came to life. "Handyman, I'm in place. You can begin when Bloody babe, oh, Riki-chan, you need to get a new phone. Bloody babe, I know a good design. You won't dissolve the keys, and it's super cute. Oh, Omega. Handyman Himiko, if you use another Kamaji, I'm going to dissolve your favorite knife. Dapster Toga, if you use another Kamaji, your knives are free for life, courtesy of me. Bloody babe, oh, greater than over equal to less than over equal to, oh. Handyman, you are FNG boosted piece of shut Dabi. Kurogiri, you are all behaving like children. Eternum is in place as well. Once compress is in place, wait for the cry. Kurogiri, and don't antagonize Shigaraki, Dabi. Bloody babe Turnichon. You'll do great. Bloody babe, we can do this. Catsup, will you all shut up? I'm paying 10 cents per text. Muscle milk, 0. Catsup, go to hell. Muscular. Me, guys, calm down. I'm not supposed to be on here, I know, but it'll turn out alright if we just stay level-headed. Please tell me you kept Moonfish out of this? More than once, yeah, obviously. Who do you think we are, Eternum? Man, don't doubt us like that. Dapster, twice. You one time chugged a bottle of vodka to see if you could make your double act sober when you weren't. Dapster, Eternum would be an idiot not to doubt you. More than once, a man. I'm glad he checked in then. Hey, I think I see compress. Izuku chuckled at his phone. He knew that Spinner had wanted to participate in the heist, but was currently keeping Moonfish occupied. All the better, if Izuku had to spend any more time than absolutely necessary with the insane man, he's go insane himself, and had no qualms with killing teammates. Closing out of the messaging app, he silently took note of the security cameras of the hallway and switched to a live feed from base. Inside of a cell, Bakugou was restrained. The glass was visibly frosted over, and Bakugou was shivering. Magna waited outside of the cell in the adjacent room and was talking to the prisoner. Izuku wouldn't hear what Magna was saying, but he had requested Bakugou's room to be mic'd, a small transceiver placed in his ear. But he knew what the gist of the speech was. As Izuku had planned, Magna was telling Bakugou that he had two options: join or receive a punishment. Either they received full loyalty of the explosive teen, and he turned away from the path of a hero forever, or he would bear something worse than death. Bakugou snarled in return, "I said tough. Nothing you scum eaters could ever do would make me stoop so low. I'll kill you." Midoriya resisted the urge to laugh. Some of the members had hoped that Bakugou would be swayed, but Izuku knew better than that. Even though the boy was far from heroic, he wouldn't be swayed no matter what. Magna simply nodded in his window and signaled. In Bakugou's cell a few screens protruded from the wall. Bakugou had a look of slight confusion for a moment before he covered it up. He was quickly assuaged when they turned on. Out of the corner of his eyes, Izuku saw the camera in the hallways falter before turning to him. On cue, Shigaraki strode through the doors and looked around briefly before stopping in front of Izuku. Bakugou's eyebrows furrowed in confusion before he grunted, "Oh, so you're gonna turn to useless Deku? He may be a piece of worthless sheet, but he's not gonna be swayed any easier than I am. And at least I'll be of use to your team, unless you're looking for a waiting SLV." Midoriya's blood boiled, but he was stopped from doing anything when Shigaraki tapped on his shoulder. "Midoriya Izuku, I presume?" Izuku was thankful for her natural nerves when he jumped. "Why, sir? Can I help you?" Shigaraki simply nodded and stayed silent. After a moment he pulled out a picture. "Do you know this boy?" On the sheet of paper was a picture of Bakugou, and Midoriya did his best to make his face remain impassive. Yeah, Bakugou Katsuki, we were childhood acquaintances, I guess. He's in hero course at UA now, almost won the tournament." Shigaraki put the paper away and sat down next to Izuku, almost uncomfortably close if not for the fact this was planned and they knew each other. Still, Izuku shimmied away a slight distance and Shigaraki huffed in amusement. "So you two know each other well then? I'm sorry for the grief it must be causing you, with his recent kidnapping." Izuku didn't even have to try as his face contorted in conflict. On screen Bakugou's eyebrows shot up, the only indication that he didn't know what to expect. Taking a deep breath, Izuku answered, "What guess? It's more that we knew each other. I haven't seen him in. Well, actually, it's been longer since I talked to him. He made it pretty clear we weren't friends. If he didn't know Bakugou better than he did, he'd have sworn he flinched. I may not have gotten along well with him, but still, it's disgusting that villains would take someone so young. I know he's my age and all, but we're still in high school. Here or not, that's just wrong." He felt adrenaline pumping through his veins as Shigaraki shifted and smirked just a bit. From under his sleeve appeared 3 white spheres, and his hand tensed, ready to strike. "Oh, really then? Of course. Villains are despicable, and even if I didn't like him that much, he doesn't deserve that. People like the ones that kidnapped him deserve to be in jail forever." He couldn't mistake as Bakugou's face did contort at this, and as Shigaraki moved to face him fully, he couldn't help but vomit a bit in his mouth. So Bakugou was beginning to regret his actions and life? A bit late for that. "So how do you feel knowing they're roaming free? Knowing that they're among the innocent people of the world? Knowing they're sitting right next to you?" Once again Izuku didn't even have to pretend as Shigaraki leaned closer until his nose was in the green curls of his hair, breathing in his ear. He jumped back on instinct, letting his bag fall open and his hand shoved inside of it. At the bottom of his bag was a few fresh apples and oranges, ready to be drained of vitality. He shivered at the proximity and watched as a female teacher, who he assumed was Toga in disguise, walked through the hallway. Excuse me, sir, do you have a visitor's pass? If not, I can gladly take you down to the principal's office. Definitely, Toga, Izuku noted as she made hard eye contact with them. Shigaraki only grinned and laughed. Toga took a second for dramatic effect, calling for help, before Izuku felt the burning pain in his leg begin. He let out a shriek as he saw his skin began to crumble and flake away. He let his hand in his bag gently siphon the life from the fruit, but not enough to prevent the visual effect of Shigaraki's quirk to settle. Soon enough, more teachers had burst into the hallway, shocked at the sight of Izuku screaming and writhing in pain. Shigaraki slipped farther back onto his face as he tossed the white spheres in front of him. Dabi, Muscular, and Mustard burst forth, and the strongest of them threw a punch at the closest teacher, sending them backward into the wall, body falling limp against the floor. Panic ensued as Dabi's flames consumed the halls and Mustard debilitated classroom after classroom. Muscular began to wail at the infrastructure, chunks of plaster and brick raining down around them. Shigaraki laughed a manic laugh, staring directly at the security camera as he shouted, "Bakugou Katsuki, you said we couldn't hurt you, and maybe we can't." But the best character development always comes when the protagonist has to watch as his friends and family die around him. Through his desperate cries of pain, Izuku could barely make out the yelling of Bakugou, "You fuckers! Let him go, he's quirkless. That's low even for you, get your filthy hands off of him. He can't defend himself, don't hurt him, he's no threat. Diminite. Stop, he's done nothing. Hurt me instead, stop it. Don't touch him, he's quirkless, he can't defend himself. Stop it, stop." Bakugou's shouts became more and more desperate as he thrashed against his restraints. Shigaraki continued to laugh and he heard the school begin to fall around him before his vision began to swim. He registered as Shigaraki's fingers left his body, the sign to act. Thinking quick, Izuku drained all the life from the produce in his bag in one fell swoop. Right after a loud crash sounded, and Izuku felt the slab of concrete crash down onto his skull. Jairu and Kaminari were frantically working to disable the television situated in the classroom, but sure enough, it remained on, the pained screams of the boy echoing around the school grounds. Somehow, all the screens had been hacked in UA High, each one rigged to show the broadcast that Bakugou was forced to watch. From the teacher's lounge to the general education classrooms, Midoriya's pained face was blown up on the big screen as the school came down around him. Most of the teachers were dispatched to try and stop the carnage, leaving the students to themselves. Many of the other classes had withdrawn from their classes, seeking refuge from the torture in their rooms, but Class 1A could do nothing but watch as a young boy was killed because Bakugou refused to submit to the villains. They had heard little of the boy, Bakugou's occasional curses containing details of a useless Deku, and when they had pressed, he had divulged the information of the quirkless boy he had grown up with. He looked different than Bakugou had described him, his typically cheerful face replaced with horror and pain. Mineta openly sobbed as he remembered watching Azui die in front of him. He couldn't bring himself to leave, but couldn't bear to watch Shigaraki take another life. Bakugou's empty desk seemed to take up the whole room as they watched Muscular smash the slab of a wall into the greenette's body, the blood left in its wake making Siro hurl. The television shut off after that, leaving Class 1A shell-shocked. The room instantly blew up in a cacophony of noise as everyone tried to cope. Ashido began to cry onto Siro's shoulder, Kaminari joining her moments later. Hagakure and Ojiro both cried together, the girl using the other's tail as a huggable support. Shuji and Tokoyami were as unreadable as always, though it was clear they were both disturbed. Ida desperately tried to regain control of the classroom, though his voice was too shaky to project its usual confidence. Todoroki was instantly on his phone, texting his boyfriend and begging him to come and comfort him, and Uraraka could only stare at Azui's former desk like it was another villain. Mikhailov tried to control her shaking sobs and Aoyama gently rubbed her back, face impassive but shimmering tears streaming down his cheeks. Only Mineta had witnessed actually death before, and he had changed for the worse after the class escaped from USJ. But the stream of the other high school had changed things, ripping away the illusion of childhood, screaming and flailing. They had just witnessed the villains they were going to fight in the future killing a child their age. Because their classmate wouldn't submit. When Shinso finally responded to the text, pushing open the doors to Class 1A, he could feel the palpable despair. The world looked a little gloomier. All Might gazed around at the wreckage of what used to be a high school. Almost half the building had been destroyed, and even hours later, heroes and police alike were working to pull out victims. Over 40 people had been pulled out of the wreckage already. 2 were in critical condition. 14 were already dead before they could be rescued. 11 of them had been students. Dealing with the swarms of reporters wasn't even the worst part of the deal. Somehow word had gotten out that this was connected to the kidnapping case of Class 1A, and the media sharks were quick to take the bait. An innocent young quirkless boy had been mercilessly killed as the result, and UA's credibility was failing them. All Might groaned as he pulled another boulder of concrete from a pile, trying to keep composure as it uncovered what used to be a leg. It was mangled and bloody, but he easily recognized the shining white of a femur and the threads of the school's gakuren. Calling over some rescue heroes, he stepped back as they took over, his power too dangerous if there was possibly a child trapped. Soon he'd have to go and speak to the deceased boy's mother. He'd been giving a short rundown on the situation, the father having passed away nearly a decade ago. He didn't think he'd ever be ready to face her. A mother losing her son wasn't something that her could ever be prepared for. They had found the epicenter of the wreckage relatively easily. While the building was piled of rubble elsewhere, the entrance hall where the boy had been killed was a barren wasteland, Shigaraki having dissolved the wreckage around them to escape. The remains of the boy was near impossible to identify, dust mixing with the rest of the rubble. But there were obvious signs he hadn't made it, chunks of muscle with matching ding, green hairs scattered and split, blood that stretched for a dozen meters in a morbidly beautiful streak. All Might had never felt like more of a failure. Class 1A and Shinso headed back to the hero dorms. It was supposed to be a movie night, but no one wanted to turn on the television. They settled with casual socialization. Kirishima was distraught as he thought about what his bro was going through. Kaminari and Jair did their best to console him while Ashido, Siro, and Sada baked a consolation cake with ingredients specially made by Yaoyorozu. Mineta was also upset, but none of the girls dared get close and none of the guys liked him enough to try. Kuda had brought a group of people outside for a relaxation session, and the flock of birds had done wonders. Uraraka let them eat from her hands while Hagakure was covered in harmless snakes, ecstatic that someone could see her. Ida ran from field to field, chasing the birds, while Mikhailov and Aoyama groomed the foxes. Tokoyami and Shuji relaxed while birds flocked to their calming aura. Ojiro headed to his room alone, deciding that meditation and core training would help him feel better. Todoroki and Shinso headed to the former's room. "Will you two stop breaking the eggs? You know that Yamamo can't make them, and we're running out." Ashido paused mid-throw and guiltily placed the egg down on the counter. "Sorry, Satkin." Siro mirrored her posture, but the egg dripping down his bare chest distracted from the effect. "Well, won't he? Wait a second, sugar is made from sugarcane. And flour is wheat, Yamamo. Why can you make those?" Yaoyorozu giggled as she produced another cup of sugar crystals from the palm of her hand. "I can't produce biological things. You can find chicken eggs out in nature, freshly laid, but you'll never find natural processed sugar or bleached wheat flour. The atoms I produce are the products of processing biological materials, but aren't biological themselves. I certainly can't make whole unprocessed grain or raw ground sugar." Ashido and Siro's eyes widened as they nodded in amazement. Sada just laughed and started to mix the batter. He was certainly tense, and he could tell that Yaoyorozu was as well, but the childish behavior of the other two made it hard to stay upset for long. All four were still worried, but Ashido's method of distraction by fun was contagious. Between her and the soft-spoken Kuda, everyone was already feeling better. Kaminari returned from calling his classmates in for cake to see Kirishima's eyes beginning to water again. Ashido clung to his side and he smiled, laughing a wet, bubbly laugh. Sadu cut into the cake, passing the first slice to Kirishima. Soon enough everyone had filtered in and were enjoying the confection. The cake was a Western-style spice cake in honor of Bakugou. It had hints of sweet orange rind and red bean paste, but was mainly a deliciously deep mixture of spicy and savory. Sadu alone thought that he had gone overboard with the cloves, but Yaoyorozu was quick to reassure him that even the professional chefs her family employed would give the cake high praise. Todoroki and Shinso were hesitant to come down at first, but the class welcomed them. The two had become acquainted after the sports festival. Shinso had been grilled by Endeavor previous to the match about how it was pathetic that a general education student thought they could beat the son of the number 2 hero. Shinso had taken it personally and was more than satisfied that he won, but thought highly of his opponent who hadn't known his quirk yet was able to fight for a long time. The two talked, and Shinsu's infective nature led to Todoroki spilling his life story, getting one in return, and they bonded. The two started to go out shortly thereafter, and the heroics class took them in as their own. The two were visibly cuddled up against each other, cold expressions slightly softer than normal. Ojiro was still uncomfortable around the brainwashing boy, but they didn't fight. Aoyama, on the other hand, had nothing against Shinso. The class stayed up late that night, helping each other recover from the trauma of watching a kid their age brutally slaughtered. They helped comfort each other when one worried about how Bakugou would fare with such evil people. They kept each other entertained when the air became too quiet and thoughts became too loud. Despite everything, watching one of their classmates die and losing another when they were kidnapped by villains, they were a family and were there for each other. The peace wasn't long to last. The first sign that something was wrong was when Yaoyorozu's spare tracker began to move. After attaching it to one of the villains, the police were aware of their location, which was unchanging and clever. But not a week after the death of Deku, as the media called him to preserve his mother's privacy, she woke up to see the blip on the radar had arrived in Mizudafu and was uncomfortably close to the student dorms. In her haste to alert the teachers, she ended up waking the entire building. A few of the students panicked, morality at an all-time low after Mineta dropped out and Ida's family pulled him back from the dorms to their own house. Shinso had taken Mineta's place and the class became more accustomed to his brands of neutral expressions, that morning's screaming stressed. The school was put on lockdown and the city called in every hero agency to protect the students. But hours passed without the dot moving until finally, it vanished from the radar entirely. The police drilled Yaoyorozu for ages, furious that she had created a second tracker behind their back, but no action was taken, since no legal suit could have succeeded against her parents, who were convinced that she had done what she believed was right. After that, bodies of police officers began to turn up, victims of the serial killer vampire, who drained the body of all their blood before trashing them. The case had started out with 3 missing police officers, and initially the disappearances and murders were considered separate. That was quickly dismissed when Vampire left a note at their previous murder claiming the 3 disappearances for themselves. The bodies appeared the day school was let out for the summer, not totally drained of blood, but trademark track marks where their blood had been stolen. Vampire was elevated to priority status, as no details about them were known, Quirks still a mystery. The case fell into disarray when their main suspect, a young girl on the run named Toga Himiko, was found victim of the murderer. Her quirk made sense for the emo and she had vanished at the slightest implication of her guilt. Police didn't want to believe they had been so wrong, but as the killings continued, they were forced to move forward. The police began to catch leaks of information from captured villains, of how infamous the League was in the underworld, and rumors of their new members, each one more terrifying than the last. It was said that they were taking in villains still hiding in public, villains who were high-ranking and famous, gathering their forces. Names like Eternum, Nico, and Silk Scarf surfaced in unpleasant conversations. It was known that the League was a threat, but if they were uniting the commonwealth of villains with the bourgeois of villains, they were stronger than they believed. Then Eternum himself appeared on UA campus. The second term had begun, and the heroics class was just barely beginning to heal from their wounds. They lost Azui to a villain and Mineta to terror. The Idas pulled their son from the educational facilities entirely, sending the boy to UA during the heroics exercises. Kaminari flunked out after his grades tanked from neglect. Yaoyorozu's parents still trusted in the teachers, but they were a handful of the few that did. Hagakure's parents feared for their daughter, wondering how long it'd take to notice an invisible girl was missing. Mikhailov's Batya and Matushka had wanted the girl to return to Russia, but her plane had been sabotaged before takeoff, forcing her to remain at UA. A clear message from the League that all who associated with All Might were guilty. Bakugou Mitsuki had been relocated to UA grounds herself, the world collectively fearing for her safety. She was all Katsuki had left. His father had been ambushed on his way to work, the subway car warped by the Black Mist villain and the riders systematically tortured and displayed for the world. Inkoabakan had fallen ill from sheer stress after her son's death, and perished to disease soon afterwards. The death had been deemed coincidental until a long-retired villain who could manipulate contagion stepped forward and once more became active. His handful of friends from middle school had steadily been picked off after the death of Deku, each one meeting an equally gruesome fate at the hands of the muscled villain. Though the brash woman was distraught over the kidnapping of her son, she became a support system for the students, pushing them as hard as any teacher did. She held the students through their panic and stayed awake all night in case anyone had nightmares. She reminded all of the students of Bakugou, and though Kaminari was no longer in the hero course, remaining on the campus for protection, the two of them were the class cheerleaders no matter how aggressive or idiotic their act was. All Might even began to extend his heroic form through training and pure determination. After the USJ incident, he was reduced down to an hour, but by the end of the summer break, he had pushed himself up to 5 hours. He was healthier than he had been since he came to Japan, and though his body was still decaying, his spirit burned brighter than ever. It had been a normal day for the students, 1 month after school began, and the air beginning to show a seasonal chill when a young reporter found their way onto the campus. Though the media still attacked UA with all they had, the jaws of the media eventually loosened to their normal state. The reporter themselves was of no concern, having followed all protocol and being escorted by a designated hero, but they sent up red flags nonetheless. Even when you tried to focus your gaze on them, you couldn't quite make out their features. Their name, Baitoka Mamatsu, was suspicious at best, but checked out. They barely talked, despite the supposed interviews of the students they were supposed to perform. They carried themselves in a cautious manner, quick to glance over their shoulder and always looking at the security cameras. It wasn't until they pulled a bloody metal bat from their pocket that the heroes sent the alarm. The villain was known as Nico, and their quick was unknown. They called it offset, and the visible differences were obvious. Glowing white ribbons pulsed with power around them, constantly contorting themselves into intricate designs and outlines. When summoned, Nico grew monstrously long limbs, gangly but strong. The mouth engorged, filled with sharp fangs, and their second set of eyes opened, soul-sking black orbs beneath their normal red ones. They could detect uncertainties and change them into absolutes. They had been begged for more answers, but claimed that was all they even knew of their own quirk. With a clean swing of a bat, the hero escort was beheaded, lengths of ribbon following the flow of the weapon. Students fled, but Nico made no move to follow. They treaded to the classroom of 1A where the students remained motionless in their seats. Nico made no move to attack, simply blocking the door. After a tense moment, where Aizawa desperately tried to erase the quirk to no apparent avail, the ribbons contorted into a pod, which unwrapped to reveal the hooded figure of Eternum. Izuku had been careful not to reveal his identity any more than necessary, and added a voice changer to his outfit, concealed behind a bandana. He felt himself filled with glee at the shocked faces of the students, and even let himself revel in the blank stare of Aizawa. Over the past months he had risen to infamy as a tactical serial killer with no real motive. He killed with abandon and his moves couldn't be predicted. In reality, all of his killings had been experiments for the sake of the League. He had become their chief strategist, and every victim he claimed was a test of some sort or another. From seeing how dexterous Dabi's flames were to trying to figure out Nico's quirk, dozens had died at his hands. He had been the one to plot moves with Sensei, he had been the one to gather information on missions. He had cut his hair into a fluffy mohawk and dyed it bloody red. Sensei had been kind enough to grant him a quirk that let him change eye color at will, which were now an imitation of Bakugou's brilliant red ones. Even without his hood up, he wasn't easily recognizable as a boy everyone thought was dead. Disappointed. Nico, I could have sworn that my notes said that All Might had this PRD? It would have been fun to fight him, though I doubt his body could offer much to me. Nico tilted their head. No, sir? You said that you dash. Izuku growled. Nico, I've told you time and time before, you're supposed to play along. Whatever. Since that a-hole isn't gonna let me have any fun, I might as well get this over with. He rolled a white sphere between his fingers, and every student instantly perked up, recognizing it as the form Bakugou had been forced into when he was kidnapped. Izuku scoffed. Yes, it's your precious Bakugou, take him. He's of no use to us anymore. He's of no use to anyone anymore. He tossed the marble forward and multiple students dove for it, expecting it to materialize into their lost friend. Nothing happened. What? Did you honestly think we'd be idiotic enough to just hand him over? No, figure out how to reverse Mr. Compress Quirk yourself. It shouldn't be hard if any of you are half as smart as you claim. I got myself out of that form in 17 minutes flat and I couldn't even hope to get into this school. Izuku giggled. It wasn't exactly an exaggeration, but it had been entirely the work of his quirk, which was something the others could never replicate. He had been transformed and deposited in a wooden cabin along with 7 other victims. He was able to gain movement by absorbing energy from the flooring, and slowly rolled his marble to the others, draining them of their life force. While the quirk wore off if a body was unable to continue living, it also wore off if the body could overpower it. Izuku managing to escape after killing 3 of the prisoners. The others had been kept for further testing. Kirishima glared up at him and blinked back tears. His best friend was so close, but still trapped. You monster! You're not even unmanly, you're a disgrace of an existence. You don't deserve anything you have, you piece of shit. You've killed kids, you side with the people who killed my classmate. You're despicable. Izuku watched as the boy who shone with sunshine cursed him out. Though he wouldn't go so far as to attack a vital part of his plan, he could still have fun by taunting them. I didn't know you thought so highly of me, Aijiro. Surely you knew that as a villain I take to those words quite fondly? And besides, what gives you the impression that I was already part of the league when Tsuyu died? Everyone knows that the surge of recruitment happened after Stain was caught. He giggled as Kirishima recoiled in disgust. Finally Aizawa spoke up. Well, you've done your duty, correct? You've delivered my student to me, you've thoroughly frightened my class, and unless you make to attack, which would be an idiotic idea, you've got no more tricks. Izuku eyed Aizawa and pursed his lips. Oh? And what makes you think that? Aizawa scowled at Izuku, and he noted how beautiful the expression was on him. We know more than you think. If the League is willing to send a loose cannon and one of the leaders to deliver a hostage, this is entirely for show. Your warping friend is nowhere to be seen, and though he could appear anytime, you chose to enter undercover instead of warping. It's a jab at our security and credibility like every single other attack has been. You won't be entering unnecessarily. Your leader is a childish man and you're more than the type to flaunt your plans. You've more than likely appeared to give us an official declaration of war. If you're willingly returning Bakugou-san, then his most useful place is with us. It all adds up to a pathetic flaunt of power. You aren't here to attack, you're here to put on a show. So go on, spoil the ending of the show, you're losing your audience. Izuku chuckled. I knew a high-ranking hero like Eraserhead would be smart enough to figure that out. And yes, you don't fool me, Shoyuta, you may be hidden from the media, but I would hardly be an informant if I didn't know you are the number 11 hero. Aizawa's face gently contorted, shocked that one of his biggest secrets was simply thrown out into the open like it was no big deal. Izuku waved his hand dismissively and turned back to Nico, stepping back onto a ribbon. We, the League of Villains, have laid our pawns in their places. So prepare all you want, but you cannot prepare against the unknown. We'll be waiting for your first move. Make it wisely. And Nico-kun? Tell Shigaraki and II to send in Kajita next time. I'm a horrible host. Then they were gone. The game had begun. Tourney Crane. How did your trip go? Toga was quick to meet Izuku at the entrance of the bar, and he grinned. Himiko-chan. They were less boring than I had anticipated. Kirishima was emotional and angry. I suppose that much time with Kaken would rub off on you after a while. It did with me, even if it took a while to show. Eraserhead is smart. He called me out when I was trying to toy with them, but that's to be expected of a hero. No one else really stuck out though, but 2 is better than the anticipated 0. Toga giggled and took Izuku by the hand, dragging him off to the back room. He once would have gotten embarrassed by the physical contact, but he had come to learn that Toga was simply a clingy girl, and her cutesy personality wasn't only for those she was crushing on. He took it in stride, and though it took a while to get used to, he didn't flinch anymore when she grabbed at him and tugged him after her. Izuku, really, hadn't changed as much as someone might have thought he would. He still overanalyzed every situation he found himself in, was still fascinated with how quirks worked, still cheered for his friends and gave them the utmost support. He still smiled while he talked, still muttered when he thought. He simply decided that he'd do it for himself and not for others. After joining the League of Villains, their perceptions of Eternum, showing him as confident and sadistic and bloodthirsty, were quickly proven wrong. When he had first unmasked, Toga was quick to cling to his side, giddy that she wasn't the only villain their age. He had fallen over in shock when he backed up, which caused a chorus of laughter. It wasn't long before someone had questioned him as to whether he really was Eternum or simply some wannabe teenager. Her name was Taguchi Setsu. She was a woman in her mid-30s with an alluring body, and went by the villain name of Phantom Pain. She was able to induce pain on others by focusing her eyes on the part of their body. Toga took his side without hesitation, while others backed the team member they already knew. They dueled for their lives at midnight, bets piling up against the fake Eternum. Phantom Pain wasn't a physical fighter, her debilitating quick giving her a range advantage. They equipped their costumes, hers a fitting, rose-colored bodysuit that left little to the imagination. Izuku figured that grown men might have been distracted by the ample cleavage she showed or the curves of her legs, but Izuku was neither interested in women nor interested in losing. The battle was over quick. He felt as his legs flared to life, pain seeping into his bones, but every time he felt overwhelmed or she moved the pain as she stalked back and forth, he reached into another pouch to grab a handful of small grapes and drain them of their life. He finally got close enough to the slippery woman to rip her suit. In the brief moment his skin touched hers, he powered his quirk up to maximum power, and she collapsed, hair instantly graying. The arena went silent, and he felt his body release from her quick. She gazed up at him in terror, and begged for her life, but he was quick to roughly grab her jaw and drain her for everything she had. A foolish young man came after him, shouting, but his hands were bare, and the moment he landed a hit, he fell to the floor as well. Izuku hadn't agreed to duel 2 people, but he made an example of the unknown villain anyways, feeling fresh as he drained the boy's life. People were afraid to talk to him after that. Shigaraki had found it hilarious. He said that Eternum was going to be their cheat code, and that he was glad they were allies instead of enemies. Toga squealed when it was declared that Eternum was part of their group now, and Izuku himself even laughed at the girl's enthusiasm. Dabi was as quiet to Izuku as anyone else way, but Izuku was a smart boy and Dabi knew it. His body language was casual and unthreatened, and Izuku had even initiated a few conversations that Dabi willingly continued. A few others caught his attention, and he quickly bonded to Muscular as his ultimate sparring partner. It took him a while to get used to all the attention and the missions he was sent out on, more popular and admired than he ever had been before in his life. It was a pleasant change though, he decided, and he found himself spending more and more time away from home, hanging in the bar. After Sensei got word of Izuku's notebooks, he asked for a personal audience. Shigaraki, who had come to tolerate Izuku as more than just another villain, seemed to be excited, while Toga and Muscular encouraged him to go and show his sensei what he was made of. When he was asked how detailed the notes were, Izuku embarrassingly rambled about how he had spent his whole life on them. They were his pride and joy. He talked for almost 3 hours, and Sensei didn't interrupt a single time. By the end of the meeting, Izuku was breathless, but happier than he had ever been before in his life. All for One had revealed his true identity to Izuku, and had actually listened as the boy muttered. He even understood, and talked with the boy on his own level. Sensei stated that he wanted Izuku to begin training Shigaraki in strategy and decision-making, and Izuku was more than happy to agree. Shigaraki was a prickly, childish brat most of the time, but Izuku didn't mind. He didn't victimize Izuku and lent him video games, even going so far as playing multiplayer with him. Izuku considered them friends, though he didn't really have a good basis of what friends were as a comparison. Sensei saw Izuku for the boy genius that he was, the labyrinth of his mind worthy of challenging his successor. From that point on, it was apparent that Eternum was much higher up than anyone else could hope to be. He talked freely with Shigaraki and shared drinks with Kurogiri. He debated strategy with Toga and Dabi, exercising his influence to perfect the vanguard strikes. Toga was the one who approached him when she said she wanted to disappear so she could devote all of her time to the League. Izuku had faked his own death before. He could help her escape from pursuit as well. That was Izuku's first big accomplishment. He set up a series of murders for Toga to commit, getting enough blood from various police officers to successfully infiltrate the PSIA headquarters. She broke into the evidence drawer of her case, the serial vampire Quirk, and relayed what she could. From there, Izuku, who had sniffed out Yaoyorozu's tracker and kept it for potential usage, whipped up a plan to get Toga's body into police custody. A simple disappearance wouldn't cut it for a murder suspect. Getting Kurogiri to warp a small group of experienced villains to UA, he planted the tracker dangerously close to the school and began their plan. There were 4 others there to help Izuku and Toga. A villain by the name of Kajita could siphon fear from others and turn it into a ghoulish black clay she could wield and construct with. Mustard provided a gaseous cover for the girl to sneak into the 2A dorms and school grounds, his quirk obscuring the security system and preventing anyone from interrupting their activity. She used the residual fear of the class to line the walls and doors for when the students woke up. She also left marks in the classrooms, since the quirk's physical manifestations scared others, creating more fear that she absorbed to become more powerful. Izuku suspected that even if Yaoyorozu had handed the tracking device over to the police, she'd simply make another, and he was right. Sure enough, when morning came, she panicked at the indication the villain had moved. With the fear coursing through the grounds, a high alert was called prematurely, and heroes flocked to the school grounds. Twice and Mr. Compress worked from there, capturing Shifting Hero Druid, a hero who could shapeshift into any person who gave him permission. Toga got to work draining his blood efficiently and beautifully. Twice and Toga had discovered a wonderful synergy between their quirks that made them that much more dangerous. So long as Twice was copying the same person Toga was disguised as, she had limited control over the person, and the two were connected by a sort of emotional compass, aware of each other's presence. Twice said he had a similar feeling when he had cloned himself, a sense of existence that didn't belong to him. It was how he kept track of the clones that he made, but didn't think that it'd extend to Toga as well. Having both of them copy Hero Druid yielded a confused hero who had someone else pulling at his body. They tied up the clone and knocked him out, and let Toga control the semi-conscious body of Hero Druid back to the school. Toga gave the man permission to transform into her whenever he pleased. The group returned to the base and destroyed the tracker. When all was said and done, Toga did her best to control the hero. She lured him out to an abandoned gas station and made him use his quirk on himself. He shifted to look like her, and before he knew what was happening, she murdered him. His quirk stuck when he died, unable to revert his matter back to that of his original form. He was left as a perfect copy of Toga's corpse, ready to be found by the police. She properly drained the body to mark her work, and took the man's place in the world. He had a bland personality, had no sidekicks, and was single, making it easy for her to impersonate him. Since her own quirk was so similar to that of the man's, Izuku had a few villains attack places to obtain samples of various people's blood from the resulting battles. They were sent to the bar to be analyzed and replicated, and delivered to Toga, who discreetly used the bloody red shots to keep up appearances. She became a stellar spy on the hero world, made regular contact with recruitable villains, dispatching those who didn't join them, and eliminated her government presence all in one blow. Sensei voiced how he was proud of Izuku and his plan. Toga adored how cool Izuku was and how he helped her so much. Muscular displayed an almost brotherly sense of pride, if brotherly meant beating each other up when offered the chance. As Toga deposited the two in the back room of the bar, and began to paint his nails, Izuku felt a sense of belonging he had never felt before. Tamura. Sensei. How has Eternum been treating you? Shigaraki and Sensei regularly chatted in person, the older having taken the young adult under his wing. It was no secret that Sensei treated Shigaraki like the younger brother he had had and lost. He kept his grip firm but loving and promised him the world. In return, Shigaraki carried out Sensei's will and had a family to belong to. True, he only liked a select few of them, but that was better than none. Eternum made the list, however, and Shigaraki made that known. He's strict. But he doesn't get mad when I don't like the lessons, so it's okay. His lessons make sense, but it's still so boring waiting for the heroes. Their shitty caution is dragging out this cutscene too long, and I can't seem to skip it. Izuku had been teaching Shigaraki the meaning of complex strategy and planning for some time while they waited on the hero's first move. He had wanted to strike as quickly as he could and watch the carnage, but Izuku had persuaded him not to much to the relief of their sensei. Though he resisted the lessons for a time, he liked Izuku enough to treat him as an equal. The two had a similar bloodthirsty desire for simple and pure villainy, and bonded easily. They made video game references, enjoyed the favor of sensei, and liked to watch heroes suffer. It made it hard for Shigaraki to hold out from Izuku for too long, eventually giving in and even enjoying the lessons. He was beginning to grow into a fine young leader, though his attitude and morals still marred his reputation childishly. Sensei didn't mind, because he loved the young man, and both knew that he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Wonderful. Tell him when you next see him that I have an assignment for him within the next week. It's nothing big, but I know he's getting bored of teaching you as much as you get bored of the lessons. He's only 16, even if society has cast him out. He doesn't deserve to be so cooped up. You enjoy your privacy and solitude, but Eternum is a wallflower, a quiet extrovert, not quite the lone wolf that you are. Shigaraki picked at the drying scab on his neck and frowned. I like being a lone wolf. Sensei laughed in response. Indeed you do. Indeed you do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now go, I'm sure Eternum is wondering what's taking you so long. Shigaraki nodded and headed out of room, letting Kurogiri carry him back to the bar. When he sat down, he looked around to see who was there. Dabi was drinking something on the other end of the bar, and two nameless minions were playing cards at a table. A lone citizen was also drinking in the inner, which surprised Shigaraki, but if Kurogiri served them instead of killing them instantly, they were just some pointless NPC. They did, however, complicate the matter of how he was going to ask where Eternum was. I suppose you're looking for your brother? He headed to the back. Don't mess up storage while you're back there. Shigaraki nodded at Kurogiri's unprompted tip. Pushing the back door open, he was greeted by the smell of rubbing alcohol and disgustingly fake lemon scent. That meant that Toga was once again doing her weekly nail painting sessions with Izuku, and Shigaraki groaned. He avoided the hyperactive psychopath as much as he could, and hoped his nails survived the encounter unpainted. Well, I was thinking you tend to go for the neck, but when you do that, you waste a lot of blood, Himiko-chan. The spray is much too strong to gather enough blood to keep. Yeah, I know, but it's so fun to watch. And Riki-chan keeps me supplied with various heroes' blood. Gotta keep my cover and all. The two had fallen into casual conversation while waiting for their nails to dry, if conversation about murder methods and villainous deeds could be called casual. As per usual, Toga started off with a tale of her latest kill. Izuku was quick to critique her work, and they let the conversation bounce back and forth. While Toga had much more experience being a killer, Izuku was the one with a sharper mind and sharper plans. Toga knew how to stuck her victims to her knife, while Izuku used his innocent charm to disarm. Their MOs were vastly different, but even without the common ground of why they operated, the two took to each other like flies on sheet. That's downright unheroic of you, shifting hero druid. Wasting such a valuable resource? How villainous. Sheet, you've caught me, Eternum. It's true all this time? I've been an imposter. Izuku giggled. I should hope you're an imposter. My whole plan was banking on that fact. Toga rolled her eyes and stuck out her tongue at the boy. Boo, Turny-chan, your plan is boring. They both laughed at Toga's obstinacy. So tell me, Himiko, What's it like being a pro hero? Toga instantly made a reaching sound, pretending to vomit. It's horrible and I hate it. Heroes aren't allowed to anything fun, and if they yell at me one more time for being reckless, I'll abandon plan and kill off Druid as well. They didn't let me stab anyone, they don't let me engage in combat. Why did you have to pick the most boring hero possible? Reconnaissance work is so boring, I don't know how you can stand to be an informant. Izuku shrugged. I don't know, I'm just good at being observant and like finding things out. It comes easily to me, it's how I've been so successful without being as trigger-happy as you. If you watch a person long enough, they're an open book who'll be more than willing to invite you inside. Toga shrugged. She was fond of the other boy since he was her best friend, but they still acted so differently and she had given up trying to understand him. I'll leave the information up to you, you can just tell me who to kill. She smiled her widest, brightest smile and giggled. You can count on me to carve up anyone you want. Izuku smiled. Thanks Himiko-chan. Toga blushed at the praise. It's nice having people I can rely on, I like it. The two were so engrossed in their conversation that neither noticed Shigaraki silently make his way into the room. He sat down next to Izuku, and Izuku jumped, startled at the other's appearance. Shigaraki smirked. Eternum, Sensei has an assignment for you, he'll want to be seeing you within the week. There was an awkward moment of silence before Shigaraki got up and exited. Izuku and Toga giggled after he left, both of them amused at how awkward the older villain was around social interaction. Izuku smiled and went to follow. We'll be talking soon Himiko-chan. Keep me updated on what it's like to be a hero. Izuku's eyes momentarily sparkled with awe, but it was a mockery of the dream he once held and both laughed at how ridiculous he looked. I'm off to go talk with Sensei. See you. Open sesame damn it. How do I get it to FANG activate? Kirishima was desperately yelling at the marble in his hands, tears streaming down his face. Mitsuki Bakugou was in a similar state of disheveled desperation, though she remained quiet. It had been hours since Eternum had left Bakugou to them, but no one could figure out how to reverse the quirk without Mr. Compress actually deactivating it manually. Pro heroes had been called to the scene and the school was being examined for security. The police were investigating the scene of the murder while the teachers accounted for the students. Recovery Girl and Nizu had been called to help try and free Bakugou, but so far nothing had worked. Kirishima had started to get desperate after an hour, and Mitsuki Bakugou only lasted a little longer than him. Another professional healer was called in to examine the marble, which he confirmed was indeed biological material. The quirk itself seemed to bend space into a small pocket dimension which was contained by an unknown barrier. The man suggested breaking it, but both Kirishima and Mitsuki Bakugou immediately rejected the idea, worried about what would happen to Bakugou. Wait a second, we're missing something vital. Yaoyorozu had attempted to aid in the effort, but if Nizu was unable to help, she said she couldn't be able to do any better. Kirishima had begged her to at least brainstorm, and she agreed, touched by how dedicated he was to his friend. Eternum said he got out in 17 minutes, and while that's likely a stretch to demoralize us, the idea remains that he was able to get himself out. We don't know what he knows about the villain's quirk, but we still need to operate without that knowledge, which means he knew we'd be able to succeed. Aizawa-sensei said he seemed the type to flaunt his plans, and he was a smart man, he wouldn't have just turned Bakugou-kun over to us without purpose. And Sensei pointed out how Eternum was a man who acted wildly as long as it benefited his plan. If he wanted Bakugou to be a simple demoralizer, he didn't have to return him at all. A simple tip-off about a location would have sufficed to create the close yet so far feeling. She began to ramble to herself, Nizu occasionally interrupting to validate or shoot down a point. The others in the classroom were hanging off her every word, Kirishima turning the marble over in his hands. Mitsuki Bakugou had wanted to be the one to hold her son, but the adoration and love in the other boy's eyes had been enough to convince her otherwise. He was young and smitten with her son and be needed to support more than she did. All we lack that Eternum has is his quirk. His quirk, we don't know what his quirk does. Principal Nizu, could you access some case files for me? Her voice was so hopeful that it brightened the room significantly. Nizu hurried to page a police officer, who promptly came with information. The two looked it over for some time before Yaoyorozu gasped, "That's it. We can't really tell what the effects of Eternum's quirk is, but what's important isn't the details, it's the effects. See, if you look here, every single one of his victims is decrepit and shriveled. Smaller than what they once used to be. If the quirk is a pocket dimension creation quirk, that means there's a set amount of matter in the marble. By changing the size of the contents, the marble is no longer able to contain it and is forced to open." Mitsuki Bakugou was quick to hug the girl, but Yaoyorozu wasn't finished. "However, I'm not sure how we can change the size of the inside. Eternum's quirk seemed to kill if overexposed, and we have nothing of the sort. And that is where I may be useful, young student." Nizu hopped up onto the teacher's desk and stood confidently. He put out a paw for the marble and Kirishima handed it over reluctantly. "Shizenji-sama, call in lunch rush, I have a sort of idea." Bakugou was kept prisoner for over half a year, and being a prisoner isn't known for being hospitable. He had likely suffered from malnutrition or personal neglect resulting in muscle loss. He was taken to the villains outside of the quirk, and would have only been put back in recently if they had wished to interrogate him. We can hopefully restore him to a more healthy size if Shizenji-sama heals him, but in order for her quirk not to kill him, extra energy must be obtained through Lunch Rush's quirk. Lunch Rush was able to remotely manipulate the volume and nutritional content of a person's stomach contents. Originally a hero who specialized in capturing villains too dangerous to directly combat. His quirk actually had nothing to do with his culinary skills, contrary to popular belief, and he had learned to cook as a means to keep himself healthy without having to use his quirk. Not moments later, Recovery Girl returned with Lunch Rush in tow. Quickly explains his idea to the others. They set to work. Lunch Rush took a while to get started, but was eventually able to get through to Bakugou. The marble got tangibly warmer after he was done, and Recovery Girl leaned in for a kiss. Kissing the small orb was not as easy a task as it appeared, and she dropped the item more than once. Finally, she landed a smooch right on the image of Bakugou. The orb grew too hot to hold, and began to vibrate. The orb expanded in the blink of an eye, and Bakugou laid before them. Kirishima let out a quiet sob. What had once been a well-toned, muscular young man was now skin and bones, emaciated figure showing angles from bones jutting out of the skin. His ribs were easily countable, and the shirt of his costume was baggy and barely fitting. His pants hung loosely on his hips, held up only by pointy hip bones, and his gauntlets were too large for his hands, which now resembled a skeleton. Kirishima rushed forward to hold the boy, planting an emotional kiss on his forehead. Mitsuki was quick to follow, holding her son tenderly in her arms. She soon froze though, Kirishima letting out a harsh noise of despair. The other heroes rushed over to find the problem, only to be confronted with a harsh reality. Bakugou Katsuki wasn't breathing. The ensuing events weren't exactly clear in any records, and no one was of a clear enough mind to exactly recall what happened. Recovery Girl had been quick to act, beckoning the standby medical team into action. Mitsuki Bakugou was quick to break down, scared to lose her son, but Lunch Rush assured her that if the boy was beyond hope, neither his quirk nor Recovery Girl's quirks would have had any effect. Nizu noted how returning a dead body would have been a useless maneuver, not understanding what else he could do to comfort the grieving woman. Bakugou Katsuki was moved into the intensive care unit of a hospital traditionally reserved for heroes and victims of villain attacks. If he had been returned merely a day later, the boy would not have made it. His heart rate was dangerously low and many of his organs were reaching critical failure rates. He was trapped in a coma due to heavy bodily damage and neglect. It was unsure when he was going to wake up. It was unsure if he would. The teachers postponed the rest of the hero classes that week in an effort to reduce trauma. Hound Dog arranged for therapists for any and all students who needed them. Eraserhead gave the class a superfluous free PRD. Recovery Girl pulled out all the stoppers on her knowledge of calming treatments. After they discovered the terrifying black sludge covertly pasted around the school, All Might was quick to clean it up. Pro-heroes Lemillion and Sun Eater were common sights in the halls of the heroics department. Sun Eater was always seen shadowing either Lemillion or Kirishima, while Lemillion would oftentimes be found hyping up his former kohai during training and exercises. The Class 2B students eased up on their rivalry, doing the best to comfort the traumatized students of 2A. It was a bit hectic and very unstable, but it was working. The principal had decided on a last-minute meeting in his office. It wasn't just teachers that had arrived either. The Endeavor Hero Agency had sent along representatives to stay informed of the situation, as had several other hero agencies in the prefecture. The league had begun to grow rapidly, and UA had realized that they had no expenses to spare. The situation was grave and they were running short on time, so Nizu sighed. The fact that serial killers are working for the league is more than worrisome. I understand that we've identified multiple villains who are currently working with the league. Does anyone have a full roster? There was a momentary awkward silence and no one came forward. Nizu had figured that would be the case, but had hoped that he would be proven wrong for once in his life. Nodding, he struggled to pull out a stack of file. His quirk gave him superhuman intelligence and processing, but his body was still what the scientists had made it, and his strength was proportional to his size. Sighing with relief, he jumped back up onto his chair and poured himself a cup of tea. As I've briefed everyone previously, serial killers are joining the league in herds. So far we've confirmed Nico, Innsmouth, Fester, Kill Count, and Silk Scarf to be working with the league. It is suspected that Queen Bee is also working with them, as their bees have been found containing trigger, but they still have yet to be witnessed in public. Vampire is also likely cooperating with their forces, as many of their victims' deaths have been detrimental to our cause. The hero killer has also managed to escape from prison, but has not yet struck again. Toxic Chainsaw is confirmed not to be working with the league, nor is Shotgun or Trapezius headgear. Eraserhead? Aizawa nodded and stood up. He was in charge of managing the intel on various underground groups, as his agency dealt with black market villains and their lot. Based on the reactions of some of the various heroes around the auditorium, he was still largely unknown. He set down his papers and cleared his throat, speaking on behalf of the Nighttime Hero Agency, which got some acknowledgement. Considering people still knew of his company, we have been investigating a multitude of various groups connected to the underground, vigilante, mercenary, villain, and otherwise. In the villain category, the largest remaining Yakuza group, the 8 Precepts of Death, are suspected to be neutral on the matter and can be considered not to be working with the league. Team Reservoir Dogs are working with the league. However, they are compromised due to the loss of the leader, Yellow, to law enforcement. Abegawa Tenchu Kai are actively working against the league, but it is purely out of competition and are still aggressive towards heroes. He flipped the papers over and internally braced himself for a difficult explanation and reception. Outside of the world of villains, those who used quirks illegally became considerably harder to place. Many people saw vigilantes as true heroes even though the law condemned them. Many people saw mercenaries and bounty hunters as legitimate careers despite their frequent interactions with villains. People who weren't quite either were hard to place by definition, and with the upcoming confrontation with the league blooming, categorization wasn't necessarily the best way of establishing relationships. There was no way to tell how the other heroes would receive the news of the non-villain group statuses. Aizawa sighed. The only known mercenary group to inhabit anywhere close to this area is Event Horizon. It is a small group, but through unusual means, they have promised to cooperate in movements against the League. As he had expected, the statement caused an uproar. The topic was a sensitive one, whether or not mercenaries fell into the same categories as villains. Many people argued that were closer to vigilantes, while the rest maintained they couldn't be accurately compared. Aizawa figured the uproar was caused by the implication that UA was paying illegal mercenaries instead of capturing them. That wasn't the case. Aizawa simply happened to know one of the members personally. He cleared his throat and the noise died down a bit. I will be covering that later, but rest assured if I knew as much as I wish I did, we wouldn't need their cooperation. Yurei, a group with unknown motives who only appeared 3 years ago, seems to remain inactive. They specialize in mass movement of humans and exposure of crimes, but have also been known to be very interwoven with the black market in many countries. The Kindred condemned the League's goals, and upon visitations to Nurse, she suggested the group would be taking action against the League. That caused another ruckus, which annoyed Aizawa. It was a well-known fact among the hero world that nighttime hero agency dealt with shady organizations. His information shouldn't be causing such controversy. Because of how the law worked and how heroes had to follow specific guidelines, oftentimes the heroes could do nothing against well-structured corporations. The Kindred was one such a group. Consisting of 4 people, the Kindred was a mercenary group that seemed to be more like a family than business arrangement. The eldest, Minnie, held ties to the vigilante world. The second, Screwdriver, worked with the shady side of hero agencies and support companies. The third, Nurse, acted as a neutral healer who worked for everyone. She was occasionally visited by Aizawa or his co-workers for information brokering, but since there wasn't enough evidence to formally connect her to the Kindred, she remained at large. The rookie, Poppet, had hands in the marketplace. The rarely were active, but when they were, the criminal world followed. Aizawa simply sat down and looked to All Might. I believe you were the one in charge of vigilantes? Your turn. Aizawa narrowed his eyes exasperatedly. All Might stood far too fast and almost knocked over his chair. That alone would have caught the attention of the room if his booming voice hadn't chimed in moments later. Yes. As for vigilantes, I have been investigating that as well. There are few known vigilantes left in the world, now that hero businesses are active, but there are a few who remain to be contacted. Though they are technically against the law, it will be useful to take all the help we can get. Pop Step, Crawler, Owls, the Convictor, and Skeleton will most likely be willing to help against villains. However, a few of them, namely the Convictor and Skeleton, have been known to get aggressive with those that agitate them, even if they are heroes, so if you encounter them, engage them with caution. Nizu stepped back up onto his podium and smiled. As All Might said, extreme caution will be necessary at all times. Whether it is confronting those working with the League with attempting to recruit those against it, we have entered dangerous times. The definition of hero is at risk, and society as we know it is being threatened. We are the hope for tomorrow, and cannot just let the villains take us lying down. This will be a difficult battle and test many moral and emotional boundaries, but we are heroes for a reason, and if the world cannot count on us, then who are we to call ourselves heroes? Plus ultra. Plus ultra. Nizu nodded, satisfied with the enthusiasm he had rallied up, and returned to his office. Yo, why's the mini Endeavor been so broody lately? He was even getting less bitchy too. The F happened? It can't possibly be Bakugou, those two hate each other. Yarashi bumped Yaoyorozu with his elbow and grinned. She mentally sighed, getting tired of the other's antics. He had begun his year disappointed at how he had ended up in the same class as Todoroki. Over the year they had interacted though, the two had begun to tolerate each other until they could tentatively call each other rivals. As of recent, however, Todoroki had indeed been considerably moodier, and while it had been bothering the class, apparently Yarashi was taking it the hardest. She shrugged. I'm not sure. Maybe you should ask him yourself. Though if it does come to comforting, do try and leave that to someone else. You've never been a very comforting person. She laughed awkwardly, embarrassed at her wording. While she meant it, she hadn't meant to come off too harshly. He only shrugged it off and grinned. Okay, sure, but if it had anything to do with Father Dearest, I'm gonna dump him on you again. The duo had taken to almost adopting Todoroki after the sports festival, having overheard his father berating the boy for losing to a student from general education. Though Yarashi still didn't really like him, and Yaoyorozu didn't really know how, they decided to become his friends. When he had started to open up to them and Shinso, it was revealed how horrible a person his father had been, and they vowed to protect him from his abuse. Yarashi was his hype squad, always providing the energy and enthusiasm through the day. Yaoyorozu was a quiet and calm hand that smoothed his wounds, and Shinso was a comforting presence in times of distress. Eventually Uraraka and Ida had joined them. Flopping down on the couch next to Todoroki, Yarashi grinned. Hey, Shudo, why were you looking so down? He almost mentioned Bakugou and how that couldn't possibly be the reason, but Kirishima was in the room, and he liked the passionate redhead too much to accidentally upset him. Todoroki just muttered a quiet reply that he couldn't hear before looking at him. There's something that Eternum said that's been bothering me. Yarashi shrugged. The guy was nuts. He was talking about this like it's some sort of game. Don't let it get to you, we can't be put out by them. He deliberately grinned as wide and excitedly as he could, but Todoroki only nodded. Letting his cheeks fall a bit, he hummed, "Well, what exactly was it that he said that bothered you? We've got plenty of smarts, I'm sure we can help you with it." Todoroki nodded. "Well, it wasn't really what he said so much as how he said it. Aizawa-sensei said it himself. Eternum is someone who flaunts his plans, he's someone who is careful and analytical, and he's smart. We're going in underestimating them." Yarashi narrowed his eyes. "I dunno, I think you're just overestimating yourself. You're worrying too much. Besides, what evidence do you have to support your idea?" Todoroki actually reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. That was when Yarashi realized the boy was serious. Looking down at the screen, he saw there was a note open on it. He frowned. "Oh? What's that?" It's been well established that Shigaraki is a man-child with a poor understanding of how heroism works, but that doesn't explain Eternum's wording. Not only did he say they had placed their pawns, but he also referred to our efforts as our move, and even told Nico to play along. It'd be one thing if it was Shigaraki who was talking like this was a game, since he'd already been doing so, but for Eternum to be doing it as well? Yarashi didn't want to admit that he was right, but there wasn't any use in saying he was wrong. He had overlooked it at the time, but when Eternum spoke to them, face obscured and voice masked, he had indeed used the same descriptive words that Shigaraki would use. Though they didn't know the villain's age, Eternum seemed to be much more mature than Shigaraki, so the fact that they thought similarly was odd. Yarashi said so. Not only that, but Aizawa said Nico and Eternum were a leader and a loose cannon? Nico is probably our age or younger, based on the look of him, so he's likely the loose cannon, which leaves Eternum as the leader. He'd have to be considerably more mature to lead. Todoroki nodded. Then why is he acting like this is a game? Yarashi only shrugged and got up. Tugging Todoroki by the wrist, he smiled. "Dunno, but you're not gonna solve it by just sitting there and moping. We can't let villains get to us. We're going to be heroes, and nothing the villains do can stop us." He pulled Todoroki along behind him over to Yaoyorozu. "Yamamo, we're gonna get lunch now, you should invite the others." She smiled and nodded. She could practically feel the apprehension and anxiety rolling off of heterochromatic boy, but she figured it could at least wait until after lunch, or he wouldn't be nearly as calm. Pulling out her phone, she quickly texted their friends and followed the two boys. Sighing, Yaoyorozu popped another takoyaki in her mouth. "Inesa, I thought we were trying to de-stress Shudo, not make him stress out more." She had hoped that bringing out her group of friends would help them relax after the return of Bakugou, but instead of helping her, Yarashi had begun to feed into Todoroki's stresses. She rolled her eyes. "I understand this might be important, but the teachers don't want us to stress too much. We should try to relax, not solving a case we don't have all the information of." Yarashi vigorously nodded. Yeah. But look, really, this is undoubtedly important." He shoved Todoroki's phone into her face, and she almost dropped her takoyaki boat in surprise. Sighing humorously, she put down the paper container and read, "You have, what gives you the impression that I was already part of the league when Tsuyu died? Everyone knows that the surge of recruitment happened after Stain was caught. Highlighted. I'll take it that this is a transcript of the encounter from last week, and dash. Wait a second." Uraraka's and Yarashi's eyes both lit up as Yaoyorozu's eyebrows furrowed, but this means that Eternum would have only joined after Stain was apprehended. That can't possibly be right. Eternum's first victim was a young man who had likely attempted to rob the killer. That was at least a few months before the Stain incident, but hardly more than half a year. So far all of the recorded killers who have joined were infamous villains who had escaped the police, but Eternum hadn't had the chance to rise to fame before that. He's not like the other villains. She narrowed her eyes. "I don't know what you guys think you're doing, but this is work for the heroes. We're just students, and we may be second years with more experience than some pros, but this case has killed people far more experienced than. We can't just charge into this head first." Todoroki huffed and grabbed his phone back. "I've been trying to get this to Endeavor's attention, but he's hardly been paying any attention to me and the school since the festival." Yaoyorozu and Shinso both winced. The two of them had the most experience with Endeavor's rage, and thinking about how Todoroki had to live with that was a sickening thought. Shinso had even tried to apologize to his boyfriend after they had gotten together, but was turned down each time, Todoroki saying he was glad it was himself and not Shinso. If the man was ignoring his masterpiece, it was clear that he had lost faith in his son. Yaoyorozu nodded. Well, even so, this isn't something that's a secret from the heroes and police. They have access to this just like anyone else does. Todoroki shook his head, but no one else had acknowledged it. I've managed to get access to the case files through Endeavor's agency. It's my chance to redeem myself, and this connection isn't anywhere on it. You've gotten farther than any of us have already. We can't just leave this up to the heroes. The disgust in his voice was palpable, but no one brought it up. After their months with Todoroki, he had made it clear that discussions about his father were uncomfortable at best, and they had more important issues to deal with. Uraraka stood up abruptly and leaned across the table. She gripped both of Yaoyorozu's hands tightly and looked at Yaoyorozu beggingly. Yaoyorozu began to falter in her conviction that the course of action was wrong. Uraraka's voice was hushed by strong. Please, Momo, the league has hurt so many people and we may not be professionals, but they killed our classmate, they killed Tsuyu. We can't just let this pass us and the heroes aren't helping like they should be. Ida gently put his hand on Uraraka's hip and she reluctantly sat down. He then looked at Yaoyorozu, an intense but brave shine in his eyes. We understand if you don't want to help us investigate, and that what we'll be doing can technically be considered vigilantism, but believe me when I say that we need to be doing this. As future heroes, as moral citizens, as concerned friends, this is not something that we can afford to hesitate on. Yaoyorozu-kun, I know that you're a just, young woman who could never think of breaking the law, but he hesitated before lowering his voice. After the hero killer case, I began to realize that sometimes heroes need help too. Sometimes even the mightiest can stumble and need someone there to catch them. The heroes are working their best right now, but even if we don't have licenses, can we not provide the support if they fall? Just like Todoroki and Uraraka did for me while we battled Stain? Yaoyorozu felt her eyes begin to water and nodded. As long as there's not combat, I suppose this can't hurt. We're not breaking any real laws, and as provisional heroes, we have full rights to detain villains we engage. Yes, I'll join. But this is so dangerous, you must know that. Todoroki nodded and reassuringly hugged her, one arm around her shoulder. Yes, we know, but we're going to be heroes, Momo. If it weren't dangerous, we wouldn't be necessary, would we? She laughed wetly and he handed back his phone. Now, you were looking at the quote and thinking something, what was it? She cleared her throat and grabbed the phone. Yes, I was thinking how different Eternum has been from the other killers who have joined up. Most have been famous killers with well-known MOs, who joined up after they found they agreed with Stain's ideology. Eternum, however, is a new villain with no defined MO. He was only briefly active before the Stain incident and was not a well-known face that the League would have gotten publicity from if they took in. That's mostly what it boils down to. They've shown they have disposable forces, but all the big names such as Nico and Innsmouth have been flaunted and displayed. It's a show of force, just like Aizawa said it was when Bakugou was returned. That means they've been conscious of who they've been showing off, trying to incite fear in the masses. This doesn't match up with Eternum though. And if Shigaraki's behavior is anything to go off of, his childishness and immaturity, and the usage of gaming metaphors, the desire to show off and impress stems from him, meaning that Eternum wasn't the one who planned the displays. Since the USJ was so flashy as well, which was before anyone currently involved in the League had joined, that supports that notion. And plenty of big-name villains have been lacking from the ranks of the League. Shotgun, the killer with the gun quirk, he's claimed over 100 victims in the last decade alone, and yet there's been little talk of him. Toxic Chainsaw, the one who fought against All Might those years ago, lived through the ordeal and continued to be active. But the League is missing the attendance of one of the major names against All Might. They're being showy, yes, but they're also being selective. They're not just letting anyone in. Which means that Eternum didn't get in because he could be flaunted and displayed, and didn't get in because he was a long-standing villain. That leaves only a few things. His quirk. But Shigaraki's appears to more than enough to cover the same bases. His ideals. But since Stain's followers want All Might to shine and Shigaraki wants him to die, the differences clearly aren't deciding factors. His intellect, which is astounding, but the League has gotten along just fine without it. Which leaves me with only one real reason that I can think of to recruit someone when you have the freedom to be picky. The League knows who Eternum really is, and whoever the man was before he was a killer, he knows important information that is helping the League. Midoriya sighed at his perch, taking his eyes away from the binoculars. The task was menial at best, and really should have been given to a lackey instead of their strategist. But he didn't complain as Sensei told him what he was to do. He had been right in thinking that Midoriya was bored waiting for the hero's first move, so even if the task was boring and tedious, Midoriya would put up with it. Sensei also knew how meticulous Midoriya was in keeping notes, and since the success of the task was dependent on how detailed the notes were, Midoriya figured he also wouldn't have simply stuck any old lackey on the job. Jotting down a couple of things in his notebook, he turned back to the binoculars and peered through them. Midoriya himself had done some modifications to the binoculars, having learned a thing or two from the League's equipment maker. Zooming in on the papers attached to the end of the hospital bed, he continued to write. Status, coma. Diet, liquid. No visible date of release. Blood sugar, 127 mg DL. Oh, blood pressure, 50/31, interesting. We can't be perfect in every way now, can we, Kaken? He dug into his pocket and grabbed a small robot. Tossing it into the air, he slipped on the control bracelet and mentally directed the droid. It hovered from the top of the building he was on over to the window of the hospital. Flying to the far side of the window, he zoomed in the camera on the front of the bot. As he had suspected, Bakugou's face was covered in an oxygen mask, and a large LV protruded from his chest. His skin was pale and visibly clammy, and his breathing was labored. Midoriya grinned, and even with the LV he can't keep up his own heartbeat. Sensei, you really did a number on him, huh? He wrote down another string of data and slapped the book shut. Behind him the door to the roof opened, and he internally groaned. Sensei had said he wanted as few casualties from this as possible, and Shigaraki had agreed. Midoriya knew why. The group had said the heroes were to make the next move and it would be uncourteous for them to go back on their word. But they were villains, and as much as he wanted to watch the heroes struggle to defeat them, he also had his own MO and strategies. And if they wanted to wait for the heroes, his normal method of killing had to be tossed out, lest it be tracked back to him, as it most certainly would be. The League and all of its associates were on standby until the heroes acted, so Eternum wasn't allowed to take victims. Of course, Midoriya Izuku was not affiliated with the League, Eternum was, so he could kill as he pleased. Putting the book into his backpack, he ignored the man who called out to him. He wasn't in any sort of costume at the moment, even if he had various tools on him and in his backpacks, so he looked like any other schoolchild. He heard 3 sets of footsteps approaching him, and bit back a grin. His grip tightened around the handle of the hunting knife he always kept with him, and he looked up as the trio finally met up with him. The man who was in the front frowned. Sorry kid, but this building is for employees only. How you managed to get onto the roof is beyond me, but we can escort you down to make sure you don't get in trouble. Just follow me. Kyuko-han, I'll be right back. Midoriya could tell his eyes flashed with bloodlust, and the woman shouted out in warning. But she was too late, and in less than a second Midoriya had drawn the knife from its hiding place and sunk it into the man's neck. There was a silent moment before the man bubbled out a cough, thick with blood. Withdrawing the knife, Midoriya sent the other 2 a sharp smile. Both were frozen in fear and he began to walk towards them, calling out in a sing-song voice, "Looks like the big bad wolf got the first little piggy. Now which one of you built the stick house?" Liking up the sharp side of the knife, Midoriya felt the blade cut into his tongue. The man screamed, and the 2 bolted. He caught up to the woman before they even got to the exit. He stabbed the knife into the small over her back and she cried out in pain. He laughed as she collapsed and leapt onto her back. Little pig, let me come in." She screamed some more and Midoriya rolled his eyes. The whole shtick was dreadfully gaudy and he felt like he should be on some sort of crime show. But he was enjoying the screams of fear and pain, so he didn't let up. Pulling out the knife, he jammed it into her ribcage and she went quiet. Instant death, Midoriya thought, was not nearly as fun as it should be. Sure, it was convenient, and he didn't have to make sure she died like the man who was still gurgling behind him, but he liked the screaming the most. It made him feel powerful, made him feel like he was finally the bully instead of the victim. Really, he thought he was. Bullying didn't get much more intense than outright murder. Getting up, he ripped out the knife. The man had made it through the door but wasn't even down the stairs yet. Midoriya let himself chuckle as he thought about how he had underestimated himself. He was faster than he had expected. Flipping the knife in his hand, he threw it with deadly precision. It buried itself in the middle of the bottom of the man's foot, which had been upturned as he stepped to the next step. He shrieked in shock and fumbled to rebalance himself, inadvertently stepping onto his wounded foot, which pressed the blade into the hilt. The knife thinned gradually as reached the hilt, so the cut was larger than the blade at the bottom end. He began to bleed profusely as his blood pumped, and Midoriya smiled, readying his stance. He lunged down the stairs, arms wrapping around the man's torso. They toppled down the stairs, Midoriya expertly maneuvering his path so he injured himself the least. The man landed on his back, breath knocked out of him and too startled to move. Midoriya was straddling him, weight weighing on his diaphragm. Pulling the knife from the man's foot, he brandished it over his face and froze. He wanted to grin or scare the man more, but he could be patient. The man stopped screaming after a second, and then closed his mouth. His breath was still wavering and he still whimpered, but his eyes flicked from side to side, letting Midoriya know he was attempting to find a way out of the situation. Logically speaking, he should continue screaming for help, but he wasn't getting any hints for free. Remaining frozen, he watched as the man swallowed and spoke. How about this? Why you let me GG dash? And I don't tell the people police about why you? Peel please spare me, my W wife would be dash. BB dash. Be a so you dash. Sit. You upset if anything ha ppeen to me? Midoriya remained frozen as the man begged for his life, knife still poised over the man's face. The man shut his mouth and his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Midoriya wasn't moving, but he had been so quick to kill the other two earlier. Why was he suddenly frozen? The man could only figure that Kyuko had activated her quirk, which chilled anyone she touched, and he wasn't sure of the temperature change. After all, why else wouldn't have killed him where he stood? The man's eyes lit up with hope. Hey, gonna dash. He gurgled in surprise as Midoriya drove the knife in between his eyes, hard enough to pierce the cartilage. The fire of hope had vanished, and was replaced by absolute despair and pain. Midoriya drank it in, the emotion and fear better than if he had just killed the man outright. He had a tendency to do this to large groups of victims, killing the last one only after hesitating enough to give them a moment of hope. It was untraceable by the police, so he didn't stop himself from doing it then. Pulling the knife out, he drove it up through the man's eye, diagonal enough to stab at the bottom of his brain. He repeated the motion with his other eye, and then finally stabbed through the man's temple, satisfied when the man stilled. He grabbed a spray bottle of bleach from his jacket pocket, and liberally coated the handle of the knife with it. He could theoretically take the knife with him, but he had no sentimental attachment to it, and it would be more logical to keep this crime as separate from Eternum as possible. Eternum neither used weapons, nor left evidence at the scene of the crime, so this would be a good enough distraction. He turned back to the staircase and ascended. His bag was still on the roof, and he didn't want to have to walk through the halls while he was soaked in blood. He grabbed the bag and rummaged through it. He kept emergency transportation with him at all times, eventually finding the radio he was looking for. He clicked the button. I transmitted the coordinates of this location. Pick me up here. Bring camouflage. He tossed the radio back into the bag and waited. Toga-san, do we have to wait? Toga groaned in frustration. She had told Eternum she would watch over Nico while he was out, but she had not been prepared for what that would entail. Even though the duo was sitting in a park with nothing to get Nico off on a tangent, he still wouldn't shut up. The young boy's quirk left his mind in shambles, his familiars destroying any sense of self he ever had. One of them was currently floating around her hair, and while the white ribbons would make cute hair accessories, they clearly made worse companions. She was glad she couldn't hear them, considering how their host took to them. Nodding, she smiled her best at Nico. Of course. I told Turny-chan we'd meet him here after I sent him his Numu, and I'm not gonna lie to Turny-chan. That'd just be mean of me, and he's nicer than that. Nico nodded, but it isn't right. She speaks with clear inflection, but her words are wrong. He knows what she wants to say, but she won't let him know, will never tell him. He can't hear, he can't know. The answer is no. That is absolute. Even if she says the words, when she says the words, it is absolute. Toga let her face visibly scrunch up, and she glared off into the distance. Midoriya had said that offset seemed to work like some sort of fate quirk, and let the boy see the strings of fate that tied everyone together. His could tell what was going to happen or how someone would affect someone else for certain, but many things were shrouded in possibilities, depending on how people acted. It was the words his familiars whispered in his ears, what actions would lead to what was right and what was wrong, what should be and what needed to be fixed that drove Nico to absolute catatonia. He hadn't had any big episodes while she was watching him, but she still didn't understand a word he was saying. She sighed, and it's such a waste. You're such a cutie, Nico-chi. Your skin is perfect, and you look so good in red. Nico nodded sagely, eyes closed in tranquility. His statement was matter-of-fact, and he smiled when he said it. He's gay. Toga spluttered and clamped a hand over Nico's mouth. The ribbon threading through her hair, apparently named Futatsu, instantly snapped to attention, rigid and radiating malice. She growled, "Knock it off, Tatsujin." The ribbon relaxed, and she continued in a much more tender voice, "And, Nico, you can't just go and keep outing people like that. Your lucky big sis Magna was already living how she wants to. I have no idea who you're talking about, but you only ever talk about us, and no one is out as gay." Nico hummed, and she let go of his mouth. Turning back to her knife, she instantly regretted letting the other boy speak. "I was talking about Eternum." Closing her eyes, she groaned, even though his previous words had made a lot more sense. If the boy really could see fate, it must have been obvious that she was crushing hard on Eternum. His absolutes always meant unchangeable fates, and if he was gay, there was no way she had a chance with him, whether she confessed or not. Sighing, she tossed the knife to the side and harumphed, "Spoil sport. Well, red isn't his color anyway." Nico smiled like he hadn't just crushed her infatuation, but she shrugged it off. He hugged himself tightly and nodded, "But it is my color, you said so and Futatsu agrees." She nodded, "Well, Nico-chi, it'd take an idiot to miss that, and I'm sure your familiars are more than happy to compliment you. You're their host after all. But really, I know you're only 12, you can't just say things like that." Nico frowned, and since his body was still huddled in on itself, it looked rather depressing. But it's how it is. It's absolute. Why is it wrong to show an absolute? The uncertainties can change, and Hitatsu doesn't like it. I can't talk to the uncertainties. But he's an absolute, he's absolute to you. It's right, it's supposed to be. Toga shrugged, not quite sure if I want to know why he's absolute to me. Sheet, disregard that, don't tell me. I'll figure out what Turny-chan's absolute is on my own. Oh, it'll be fun to pick him apart. Then I can be him too, even if he doesn't want me to be. But sometimes people just don't know things, and if someone doesn't like it, then they might be mean. And if someone is mean to Turny-chan, I'll have to kill them." Nico nodded, "Yes. But Eternum can defend himself, sking, draining so much. Life vanishing. Being eaten, a dessert after the kill. Sweet but salty. It's uncertain but almost absolute. Maybe a few more tries?" Toga grinned, "Maybe. You mentioned killing, and both me and Turny-chan like killing, and if it takes a few more tries, I'll do it." She giggled and Nico giggled with her. They were still mid-giggle fit when Eternum landed. The other two ribbons produced by Nico unwound themselves from the pterodactyl like Numu and returned to hovering protectively around Nico. Toga smiled as the others stepped down from the back of the man-bird. "Turny-chan." Eternum smiled. "Himikun. Glad to see you too." Nico tugged on her sleeve and just gave her a look. As if to emphasize his unspoken point, Hitatsu wrapped around the two teens and pulled them closer. Toga darkened at the proximity to her crush, but steeled her soul. Nico said the answer was absolute, and Eternum wasn't the kind of friend to turn away from her after admitting her feelings. Hey, I like you Eternum, but I know your answer is gonna be no, so it's okay. But you still got give me your blood from time to time. I like being you way more than I like being druid. He blushed darkly, and in the background Nico was chanting, absolute, 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 while Futatsu and Mitsu danced around him. He shook his head. W. Also Nico outed you earlier. But don't worry, it was just me here, and I totally am fine with it. If you want a man over a woman, I'm sure I can find you a pretty guy any day. Eternum darkened even further, and in the evening shade, his blush looked more dark purple than red. He looked away and nodded. Sorry about that. Toga laughed and hugged him closely. Nothing to be sorry for. You are who you are, and I gotta agree, men are amazing. I'm not upset, and we'll all welcome you as who you are. Do you have a crush though? In the league? Eternum shook his head. Not really. Toga poked him in the side and puckered her lips. Oh, really? Eternum pulled away and sat down on a bench. Toga followed him and Nico just continued to play with his familiars. Eternum sighed. It was Kakin who really made me think about it. Toga scowled at the mention of the boy who had caused Eternum so much pain, but he panically shook his head, and not that I ever had a crush on him or anything. It's just, look at his body. He's so hot, and even if he's a piece of trash, he's built. Kind of a waste of a good body if you ask me. Toga nodded and giggled. Good, 'cause if you were crushing on him, I'd have to kill him. You deserve so much better. Though yes, I can see how hot he is. Not as good as Stain, but it'd be so good to cut him to shreds and watch him bleed. Eternum laughed. Yeah, well, I plan on doing that eventually. But his body really got me thinking, you know? And then one day I just asked myself, what if I want to F boys instead of girls? Both he and Toga pinked up at his wording, and he floundered over his next words, and not to I'd ever have a see with Catch-chan. He'd never let me and RP his tea too much. I doubt he'd be bottom anyway, and there's no way I'm gonna take his D up my butt. Toga burst out laughing, hand over his mouth in mock horror. Turnichan. There are children present. She pointed at Nico who had turned to them and tilted his head. Eternum blushed even more and slapped a hand over his mouth in apology. Nico frowned. What do you mean? I know what NTR Cirrus is. She can get in position easily. It's good if dash. The two teens laughed at his words and Toga shook her head. Oh Nico-chi, don't say it like that. It's so much better as love-making between fated lovers. Midoriya snorted. Don't call it that Himiko-chan. That just sounds like old people stuff, what you do when you're married. And don't scold me about language when you just go and say love-making. That's even worse. Toga grinned. Hey, at least I'm not using foul language around the child. Midoriya grinned back at her. Well, I'll be going now. Bring these notes to Sensei if you can. Doesn't matter if you look or not, they're just notes on how Kakin is doing. I have to go and get made over, it'll be a new me when you see me. Toga clapped her hands on his cheeks and grinned. You've got to show me when you're done. You'll be so cute, I know it. Stepping out of the shop, Midoriya sighed in relief. The League's disguise specialist was terribly stingy, and only after promising 2 future hits and a share of his next profit, regardless of what it would be, was he able to get a deal out of her. He really didn't want to have to kill outside of his usual MO since separating the two personas was tedious. But he needed to get undercover as fast as he could. The trio of murders had hit the news quickly. The building he was perched upon had apparently been the headquarters of Japan's big medicine, and the 3 people he had killed were prominent scientists. He didn't really care about the loss, but he also figured he probably should have been more careful when choosing an observation station. The woman that had made him over had a fashion quirk, for lack of a better word. By ingesting a person's DNA, she could manipulate how they looked physically. Midoriya had decided for longer hair this time around, dyeing it an ashy rose color. It was pulled back into a ponytail, a few curls getting loose and frizzing around in a pink halo. He had changed his eye color to complement it, and they were now a murky olive green. He had asked for a fake tan which she was willing to try out, but it had taken more than a few tries to make it look natural. He had even asked for an additional inch or two, which she had amusedly granted. His bones were incredibly sore, but it was worth it for the disguise. A day or two of rest and he'd be back on his feet like nothing happened. As he fiddled with his hair, already having undone and fixed his ponytail 4 times since he left, he noted how late it had gotten. The sun was setting and he had only managed to complete the first part of the task he had been given. Rolling his eyes, he set off towards the nearest skyscraper. Normally he'd climb up to the top of the building using his quirk, but since he had just gotten a makeover, he didn't want to risk exposing his identity again. As he strolled through the lobby, he was relieved to see that it was a simple commercial building instead of a high-profile business. There weren't terribly many people in the lobby other than the receptionist, but he paid them no mind as he entered the elevator. He hit the button to the top floor and pulled out his phone. The group chat had been lively for the past few hours, and it hadn't yet stopped. More than once. No, I'm just saying the light pink isn't your color. You need a richer pop to your lips. More than once. You look incredible in pink. Big sis Magna. Bloody babe, what would you know about colors twicey? Bloody babe, don't listen to him. Big sis. You look amazing in pink. 3. Magnetic Mrs. Aw, thanks Toga. But he's right, maybe I can go with a rosy red next time I have the opportunity. I have the blush to match. Dapster, you can wear makeup into battle, you know. Magnetic Mrs. I'll consider it sometime, I guess. Bloody babe, don't pressure her. Dobby Chi. She will when she's ready. Intersection, row, intersection. Catsup Hansi, you're going to be paying for my phone bill. Handyman Kurajajai. WWE going to get a new pwn plan as a league. Kurojiri, I'll talk to Sensei. Eternum's plan should host a few more phones. Catsup, what? Why does he get a plan and I don't? The F-dash? Me. Mustard, you still have relatives to rely on, and they don't know you're a villain. They have no relatives and no means of income, and the league needs to keep in contact with me. Dapster, whoa, what do you mean you have no means of income? Me. I don't have any work and I live in the bar. When you met me I was still too young to work. I don't have any credentials or anything anyway. Fidget Fanatic, what do you mean you weren't old enough to work? How old are you, bub? Midoriya bit his lip. He knew that the others were his friends and they wouldn't turn him away just because of his age, but the possibility still nagged worryingly in the back of his mind. Toga was about the same age as him, just a little bit older, and both Mustard and Nico were a handful of years younger than him. They'd accept him without hesitance, but none of them were the lead strategists of the league. None of them had responsibility to keep others alive. Dabi and Shigaraki were the second youngest, even though he wasn't sure which was older, and both of them were both at least 20. He turned back to the phone and was greeted with messages of comfort. Bloody babe, look what you've done, spinster. Bloody babe, you've gone and upset Turnichon. Bloody babe, apologize. Kurojiri, spinner, that was uncalled for. It's understandable if you have doubts due to his age, but Eternum has shown he's more than capable of leading us well. Fidget Fanatic, yeah, but if he's so young, why are we just following under him? He can hardly be fit for leadership if he hasn't even graduated. We'll just get caught. Seiko Atsuhiro, I have been acting as Eternum's right hand since he joined, and I fully trust him. He is young but has more drive than many of us. Seiko Atsuhiro, he may be young and inexperienced, but he is also a very smart young boy, and I believe it's in our best interest to listen to him. Kurojiri, indeed, Seiko is correct. And Sensei trusts the young boy, so you should too. Me, and a half-ish. Catsup ifs, you're still older than me. Dapster Mustard, you own me 1,000 yen. Dapster pay up beach. Handyman Dabi, don't you act this not annoying, sort of? When you are outside of the group city. Dapster, because it'd imply we're on friendly terms. I can insult you on the phone and not have to worry about your temper. In real life it's already implied, so I have nothing else to say. Me, ouch, Rakyonii, killed as he lived. Bloody babe, oh my gosh. Turnichon, you can be my little brother. Fault. Bloody babe, I'm not even 2 years older than you. Oh, Magnetic Mrs. Toga dear, I thought you had a crush on him? That's an odd comparison. Incestuously speaking. Bloody babe, he shot me down. Bloody babe, now he's just my little bro. I can take care of him. Bloody babe, and don't you worry, Turny-chan, I'll make sure nobody badmouths you for being young. And me? Thank you, Himiko-chan. But no unnecessary deaths? Killing is fun and all, but we're still supposed to be down low. Muscle milk, yeah, it doesn't matter how old you're. You can kick butt, and that's good enough. I'll kill anyone who says otherwise. Bloody babe, me too. Catsup, I mean, I'm not exactly happy I'm still the youngest part of the vanguard, but I suppose I can deal with it. Catsup, it's good to know that at least you guys don't underestimate us just 'cause we're kids. Muscle milk, I wasn't talking about you, Mustard, just a turnum. Catsup, go to the hell muscular. Catsup. Kurogiri Dabi, your earlier comment made Shigaraki dissolved his phone in anger. Please refrain from similar comments in the future. Kurogiri, I will be obtaining new company phones for everyone, more or less. Kurogiri, until then I would ask if we passed by this issue for the meantime. It can be discussed when Eternum is back home from his current task. Dapster, I didn't make him do sheet, he's the one with the bad attitude. Seiko Atsuhiro, what I believe young Dabi means is that he understands, and that none of us will be disrespecting Eternum just because of his age. Spinner, is that clear? Fidget Fanatic, yes sir. Fidget Fanatic, wait, does that mean you were the green-haired boy we killed all that time ago? Me, yes. That was me. Sato Atsuhiro, Spinner. Fidget Fanatic, yes sir. Dapster, no, that's not what I meant, but sure, that too. Midoriya smiled at the antics of his friends. He hadn't specifically told everyone that was involved that his own murder was going to be faked, since only those in his proximity needed to know. Even Toga hadn't known the connection between himself and Midoriya Izuku until the day she saw the news story. But he had also not particularly kept it a secret, and was more than willing to talk about how he had faked his own death to take a stab at Bakugou. He had thought the others would have put it together, but they apparently didn't even know his age when he thought they had. And since they were fine with his age, it was no loss. He tossed his phone into a pocket and smiled to himself. The next part of his task was going to be quite fun. He stepped out of the elevator and looked around. The floor was comprised mostly of cubicles scattered around, and the occasional room for conferences or side offices. Windows lined the wall, and the lights provided comfortably soft light that didn't feel harsh in the darkness of the night. Rolling his shoulder back and cracking his neck, he stepped forward. Excuse me, sir, can I see your ID, please? Sir? Sir. He broke into a sprint as he charged through the hallways between cubicles. Occasionally someone would try and stop him, but he was far too agile, deftly avoiding even brief contact. It registered that he'd have to mess with the cameras on the floor later, but that was no bother. He had a plan and nothing was going to stop him now. He saw the reflective glass of the window only a few meters away from him, but trained his face to not change his expression. There was a short shout as someone realized what he was doing, but he leapt before anyone could react. The glass shattered as his body rammed into it, and he began to plummet towards the concrete of the sidewalk. Yaoyorozu shook her head at the plan Uraraka handed to her. It won't work, much too risky. We know for a fact that the villains are waiting for the hero's move, and even if we're not technically heroes, we're still on their side. They may see it as an attack and we would likely be killed. Uraraka nodded sadly and handed the paper to Todoroki, who swiftly torched the evidence while Yurashi diverted the smoke. Glancing back at her notebook, she sighed, I don't have any other plans. Can I see Census of Time-related quirks again? The group of 6 staged meetings in Yaoyorozu's room after they had realized they were ahead of the real detectives and heroes, and they met regularly to discuss their newest findings. Yaoyorozu used her father's position to quietly obtain a list of time-related quirks, since he was the head of the government quirk registry department. It was not technically illegal, but Yaoyorozu was quite sure she'd be in a lot of trouble if he found out what she had done. I don't get it, Yamamo, none of these work? They're almost all time travel, and that sheet isn't what we're looking for. Hell, even Mini Endeavor's quirk would be more fitting than time travel for this. Yaoyorozu sighed at Inase's boundless energy. I've asked you time and time again, would you please stop calling Shudo the Mini Endeavor? It's quite offensive. That incident wasn't an isolated occurrence. Urashi sheepishly nodded and she continued. As for them being time travel, most quirks that are time-related have to do with time travel. Those that aren't tend to deal with freezing time or changing the flow of time. The latter type of quirk is what we're looking for, since the rapid aging we've seen victim to Eternum could only result from speeding up the passage of time. That type of quirk is extraordinarily rare. Uraraka nodded. Yes, there's only a few people on here with quirks that can speed up time, but none of them seem to match. Of the 17 known Japanese citizens and foreigners who have been consistently in Japan during the murders, 11 of them have viable alibis, 2 are immobile, and 1 is barely a toddler. That leaves us with 3 people, and all of them are women. Todoroki and Ida had both been working their relatives' connections to obtain classified police information on the matters, including the status of all suspects in the Eternum case. Unfortunately, the current list of suspects was at 0, and while Uraraka and Ida joined up to try and shatter an alibi or 2, every testimony given to the police was airtight. Urashi groaned in disgust and tossed the file he was going over to the side. Yamamo, I'm sick and tired of this. We have no leads and we haven't changed up what we're doing. We're not gonna get anywhere just repeating the same useless steps. Yaoyorozu nodded. I agree, but we haven't exhausted every single possibility yet. I'm not going to delve into the possibility that there are multiple murderers until we have proof of it, but we need to be thorough. We have no profile other than likely male, and that's sketchy at best, so we need more to work off of if we want to be able to identify the killer. If this yields nothing at all, we can move on to profiling, but that will be vague at best, considering we have no information. Ida pushed the door open to join the trio and took off his shoes. He sat on the foot of the bed. I've finished my homework for the week. 2 more incidents occurred late yesterday. 3 of Japan's most brilliant doctors were murdered on the roof of their lab building and the suspect has yet to be caught. And a young man with an unknown quirk committed suicide by jumping from the 117th floor of a skyscraper. The body exploded on impact, creating a crater on the street, and no identifications have been made. Uraraka sighed. Probably both unrelated unless the League is sending members to their deaths, I guess. Yaoyorozu nodded and sighed. We really are getting nowhere, aren't we? Urashi nodded and grinned. Yeah, that's what I've been saying, but you just wanted to keep looking at more profiles. We need to make one of our own. Yaoyorozu pulled a notebook from her arm and opened it to a fresh page. She wrote, Eternum, at the top, and put a few bullet points down. So, what do we know about Eternum? He's most likely male, if the voice is anything to go by. He's smart and sadistic. He was clearly toying with us and made his way onto you like it was no sweat. And he said he was an informant. He knew of Aizawa-sensei's hero rank. He's kinda short. Maybe a little taller than me? Definitely short for a man, but his shoulders are awfully blocky. Yaoyorozu nodded and neatly wrote down the points. Well, he had a bandana on, which could easily conceal a voice modifier. But Ochako is right, his stature isn't very feminine. His shoulders are square, and there isn't enough space for him to have birthing hips in his costume. So he's male, considering Nico addressed him as Sir. Ida smiled and was about to respond when Shinso and Todoroki walked through the door. No updates on the case so far? Yaoyorozu nodded and gestured for them to join the group on her bed. They took off their shoes and sat down. Shinso glanced at the notebook in Yaoyorozu's hands and she handed it to him. We were just talking about moving on to profiling Eternum. We don't have much information so far, that's it. Todoroki rested his chin on his boyfriend's shoulder and hummed. Admittedly, even I didn't know of Aizawa-sensei's hero rank. Whoever this Eternum really is, he's incredibly well-informed, which makes sense if he's their informant. Shinso frowned. Smart, short, well-informed. That's all we have so far. That really isn't enough to go off of. If we really want to identify Eternum, well. He didn't finish his sentence, but the sentiment was implied. If they wanted to know more, they'd have to go out and find it. Ida interjected, No. Absolutely not. It's incredibly dangerous and we agreed not to get that involved. Todoroki shook his head. No, we agreed not to engage in combat. We're training to be heroes. We can't catch villains while remaining completely careful. Uraraka bit her lip. No, I'm siding with Ida on this. We're risking a lot already. Going behind the professionals' backs. We're not going to help them by charging in unnecessarily. Yaoyorozu closed the book and set it to the side. Grabbing another notebook from her bedside table, she opened it. This is what the police have in comparison to what we have. The differences are visible. The professionals aren't taking the proper procedures seriously. This case is being seriously mishandled and heroes are panicking. We have our provisional licenses, meaning we can investigate and engage. We have training so we won't be stranded in precarious situations. We're going to be heroes and we're already so close. We can't just turn our back to this. She was met with silence by the others, and finally Uraraka nodded. She's right. This is incredibly dangerous, but we're training to be heroes. This is the world of crime that we're entering, and we've been exposed to so many times before. Maybe we won't be seeking out fights and villains, but we've come so far, much too far to just give up like this. We need to be careful, but... Ida sighed. I'm still not sure of this. I must agree that as heroes, we will be expected not to turn our backs to danger, but we're still just in training. While it may be the case that the professionals aren't looking where they need to and will not listen to us, we still need to consider how much we're willing to risk for this. Shinso butted in. Maybe, but... Yamamo has accessed files she technically shouldn't be allowed to have. Shudo and you have been using connections for uncertified hero activity. We're not villains, but our actions have been less than legal at this point, even if they are for heroic work. His words chilled the room. The bedrooms and bathrooms were unmonitored by cameras, but the six were still keenly aware that they were in the breeding grounds of heroes. Their actions wouldn't land them in jail, but all six would certainly be expelled at this point if they were caught. What had started out as a desperate attempt to combat the villains on their own scale had turned into a full-on operation that took place under the noses of the people really in charge. Innocent steps had been taken, a quick question to Yaoyorozu-sama or a number taken from the former Ingenium's phone, but they had piled up further and further. Now, instead of 6 students asking sly questions, they were accessing concealed police files and reading private hero briefings. Ida buried his face in his hands and ummed, I cannot believe this. A criminal at only 16 years old. I'm a disgrace to my family. Uraraka clamped a hand over his mouth. Don't be so loud. Hitoshi is right, we're pretty much breaking the law with our own investigation. Yamamo had gotten an earful when she had replicated just the tracker. We can't let ourselves be caught. Ida shut up, but his face was still flushed in shame. Todoroki hummed non-committally and liked his lips in thought. We haven't been caught so far, but if we really do take the step forward, we have to be careful not only to stay unharmed, but not to get caught. We have our licenses, so we can use our quirks, but if we do, we'll be much easier to identify. Yurashi grinned. I believe in us. Yamamo and Tenya can be our brains, Ochako and Shudo are more than enough beauty, and Hitoshi and I can be our brawn. We'll have to be careful, yeah, but we're the smartest, the best of our grade. We can't let Katsuki down, we can't just submit to the villains. We have to fight for them, we're heroes too. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon enough, the other 5 were also smiling. Ida nodded tiredly. Yes, I suppose that's correct, but we need to plan. We cannot simply march into villain territory without a goal or plan of attack. We wanted to profile Eternum, because we believe his identity holds a key to defeating the League. So we will. He put his hand out, motioning for the others to follow his lead. We have to fight, we have to investigate, we have to be strong enough for our friends. We will find out who Eternum is, no matter the cost. Plus ultra. Plus ultra. Todoroki was casually walking across rusted metal beams spanning the ceiling of a musty room, arms extended for balance. He was inside of an old abandoned warehouse in Kamino, searching for anything suspicious. He had his doubts that he'd find anything, but there wasn't much else he could do without Arisan-ji the notice of the villains. His disguise was iffy as it was, makeup only doing so much to cover the bumpy surface of his scar, wig glaringly fake. He didn't want to mess something up and draw unnecessary attention. The Hexad had relocated overnight, ready for Saturday. They had planned on exploring the area and taking intel, since Yaoyorozu's tracker had spent weeks in the area. Initially they had debated on letting the pro-heroes handle the situation, but when Todoroki dug into the matter, it was revealed that despite the clear villainous presence in the ward, no extra heroes were assigned to the area. That had been the deciding factor on their plan of attack. Yaoyorozu remained in their hotel room, booked under the secrecy of the Uraraka name, and paid for with Endeavor's money. She had created a fair amount of equipment in preparation for their mission, even if she had initially wanted to legally purchase the entire set. Ida had been quick to shoot down her idea, citing paper trails, and she had underhandedly convinced Satu to bake her a few cakes. Each person was equipped with a tracker of their own, a discreet headset, and an emergency burner phone. From their base of operations, Yaoyorozu managed the task of directing her team members. Uraraka and Shinso, the least recognizable of the group, had made their way to the large marketplace that embellished the center street of town. The duo were to scout the area for possible villain activity, or areas where villains could reside with little risk of being discovered. The tracker had spent a substantial amount of time in the marketplace of Kamino, and Yaoyorozu wanted to make sure that no detail was overlooked. Ida was stationed similarly in the more residential areas. He could naturally move faster than any of the other students, even without using his quirk fully, and the area was much too large to cover in the short amount of time they had. He had an entire notebook with him for observations, and though Todoroki had cautioned him that it could potentially draw attention to him, he insisted that he be thorough. Todoroki himself was scouring through abandoned warehouses in the edges of the business district. The idea had been shot down initially, but Shinso had been quick to assure the high-class students that it wouldn't be seen as suspicious. Teenagers often sought out creepy places to find thrills, and anyone who say Todoroki wouldn't see any difference. He was also the most suitable for the job, quick letting him autonomously take care of potential injuries he could receive while rooting through the rundown areas. Yurashi was an information and item deliverer. Ida had volunteered for the job, but without usage of his quirk, he only offered so much that Yurashi couldn't. Yaoyorozu had also preferred the running hero to manage the residential area, which resulted in their current roles. Hopping down from the metal beam he was walking across, he let his ice carry him to the floor of the floor. Reaching out, he melted the frozen slide and evaporated the water. He had cautioned against quirk usage, but so long as no one was around to see, he found it was the easiest way to investigate. Looking around the rest of the poorly lit room, he closed the door behind him as he left. He had only searched 3 warehouses so far, but he was beginning to think that nothing would be found in them. There were no signs of secret entrances, no villains making deals in the corners. The place was barren. His father would undoubtedly berate him for thinking the job was easy enough that simple observation would suffice, but he paid the thought no mind. His father would have a fit in general if he knew that his son was acting outside of assigned school and hero work, and the thought was more entertaining now than it was intimidating. He was brought back to reality when a soft thud caught his attention. Freezing in place, Todoroki instantly tuned into any possible repeats of sound that would be covered by his footsteps. He had been lucky to catch the first sound, air silent because he had been in between strides. But the sound was barely audible in the first place, so he really didn't actually know if it was the first impact at all. He had spent enough time training with both his father and the rest of his class to recognize the thud of a fist on a punching bag. A second thud echoed off the walls, slightly louder than before, and if Todoroki listened very closely, he thought he heard a grunt of exertion behind the force. He reached up and gently flicked his headset off, making sure it wouldn't receive any sounds that could give away his position. He grabbed his phone and shot a quick message to Yaoyorozu. "Todoroki, I'm not alone here." He didn't expect to receive an answer, unsurprised when nothing was sent back to him. He didn't quite know what to do in this situation. On one hand, they had discussed how to remain safe. The villains were waiting for the heroes to make their move, so no direct action could be taken without risking the safety of others. Anything that seemed out of the ordinary, such as entering suspicious areas or reporting back to other heroes, would be seen as action as well, preventing them from really engaging their enemies. It had been one of the main reasons Todoroki didn't want to be caught snooping around the warehouse, but if others did it as well, he supposed the villains could see the justification. On the other hand, he had no idea what was going on just beyond his line of sight, and while the vinyl slap was a telling sign of a punching bag, there was no way to tell what else was going on. He wanted to investigate, make sure no one was hurt, but also didn't want to agitate the situation. Against his better judgment, he began to slowly walk further into the warehouse towards the source of the sound. His phone vibrated gently in his pocket, but he was too focused on remaining stealthy to read whatever had been sent back to him. Slowly pushing the door to the main storage open, he glanced around the door and blanched at what he saw. Across the room, about 50 meters away from him, stood a familiar figure. The black and white vest was recognizable from any distance when coupled with the white rabbit-eared hood. Glancing down at the figure's pants, Todoroki's heart stopped as he counted 1, 2, 3 belts hanging on their hips. He was facing Eternum in the flesh, and he was dreadfully unprepared. He should send a signal to Yaoyorozu, run and never look back, but instead of the logical things, he walked forward. The other's hair was a beautiful shade of pink and his stature was aggressive. He threw another series of punches at the sandbag in front of him, growling as they made contact. He relaxed after a second, letting his arms fall loosely to his side, and he walked over to a table that had a mess of items on it. Grabbing a water bottle from the surface, he took a long drink and sighed with a refreshed air. He tossed the bottle back into the mess and turned to continue his training, but stopped short. His eyes, rich and green, met Todoroki's dual-colored eyes. There was a moment of silence before Eternum spoke. "Ochako, the warehouse he's in is by your side of the strip. Be careful, he said he wasn't alone and isn't responding to my messages. He turned his headset off too, so I'm out of contact with him." Uraraka nodded. "Understood. I'll send you directions. When you get there, tell me who the unknown person is if you can." Her burner phone buzzed, and when she checked the messages, there was a marked map to the warehouse. She smiled at the short distance and took off in the indicated direction. The longer she walked, the thinner the crowd got, until she was one among barely a dozen on the streets. When she finally slowed to a stop in front of the warehouse in question, she grimaced. The place reeked of suspicion, and she felt her stomach sinking at the idea of entering. She knew she didn't have much of a choice, however, and gingerly stepped inside. She entered into a small office area, though based on the solid centimeter of dust on every surface, it hadn't been used in decades. The door was open slightly and there were footprints through the dust. The size of the marks looked like they could plausibly be Todoroki's, though Uraraka didn't really know how big Todoroki's feet really were. The concerning part were the footsteps that crossed by the door in the hallway. They were substantially smaller than Todoroki's by at least 2 or 3 centimeters, and their treads were extraordinarily plain. Careful not to disturb any prints, Uraraka made her way outside. The warehouse was mostly empty, although there were a few boxes scattered around the open space. In the distance of the warehouse there was a figure. She was pretty sure it was Todoroki, thought she couldn't quite remember the exact design of the disguises Yaoyorozu had made. While she approached, she made sure to glance around from time to time, checking to make sure there was no ambush waiting for her to make a wrong move. It was a tactic she had learned from her internship at Gunhead's agency. Always know your surroundings when entering possible combat. It will not only help you stay on top, but give you turf advantage. When she was but a meter away from Todoroki, she saw who he was talking to, and she felt her stomach flip. Across from her classmate was a familiar villain clad in black, white, and green. Eternum. Todoroki's head snapped around to look at her, and her eyes went from calm to panicked in less than a second. Eternum didn't react, but it was clear that he hadn't been expecting company. Todoroki's hand flew up. "Stay where you are. It's safe to be here, but we can't risk making our move." She nodded hesitantly before looking at Eternum. The villain shrugged. "He's correct. If you even so much as take a wrong step, the League will considering it the hero's move, and we're getting more than impatient waiting for your turn to conclude." Uraraka snorted. "Yeah, no kidding. I'm surprised Shigaraki even knows what patience is at all." She instantly regretted speaking without thinking, and Todoroki looked horrified. Eternum, however, only laughed. "Yes, well, he's not the one who's in charge of strategy. But you'd be surprised, he's matured since you last saw him." His eyes closed and eyebrows crinkled. giving off the appearance of a smile. Then he faltered, well, at least, if you know him, he's matured. I'm pretty sure you lot won't even notice a difference. Not like it matter, I suppose. The two heroes in training only nodded, unsure of what to say. Eternum rolled his eyes. Oh please, I've already stated to Shudo that I won't be doing a thing, yet he still remains uptight and silent. If I wasn't already bored, I'm sure I'd have left already. As it is, this is the most entertaining thing that's happened to me since I broke in. So welcome, Ichoko. I promise I'm not gonna do a thing. Uraraka raised an eyebrow in annoyance. It's O-cha-ko, not Cho. And don't call me that, we hardly know each other. Eternum nodded. My mistake, but you can't make me call you anything else. Shudo refused to tell me what you're doing here. Maybe you could enlighten me. Uraraka shot a glance at Todoroki, who shrugged. Getting a lie past Eternum didn't seem like a plausible option, but she knew that if she told him what they were really doing, he might attack them. Swallowing, she opted for a safer approach. You know what we're doing here. Eternum hummed, as I thought. But don't worry, I won't attack you. You could feasibly argue that the action wasn't directly against us since we merely met by chance. Todoroki nodded. And what are you doing here? Eternum gestured to the punching bag in his right. It's what it looks like, I'm training. No one at the league wants to fight me, so I had to go with a punching bag instead. Uraraka raised her eyebrows suspiciously. Not even the big muscle dude from before at the training camp? He seems like he'd fight anyone. Eternum snorted. Oh please, look at me. Do I look like I'm any match for his strength? If I fight him, all I end up doing is dodging. I can't get a single good punch in. Uraraka shrugged. I dunno, you look pretty fit to me, I wouldn't want to fight you. Eternum blushed. Oh, haha, thank you. But have you seen him? Even without his quirk activated? That's just terrifying. I don't care if you're All Might, that amount of power is just ridiculous. Todoroki nodded. Indeed. We're lucky that we had quirks to counter him. Eternum smugly chortled. Yeah, you really are. That Inesa is a pain in my side, but his quirk is cool. Imaging what we could do if we had control over the wind. He can create them on his own, and control them remotely. Its emission seems almost rangeless. I wonder if he can fly. Uraraka opened her mouth to reply, but Todoroki shot her a dirty look. She sheepishly ran a hand through her hand and nodded. Well, we aren't gonna reveal our secrets unless you reveal ours. Eternum shrugged. I don't care where it comes from, I'll just have to find out myself. He'll let it slip eventually, even if he doesn't use it while I'm around. Todoroki raised an eyebrow, and Eternum grinned. You're a Todoroki, you can hardly think that the League has only one informant, right? Nah, I'm only the heroics informant. It's how I knew Eraserhead's ranking. Give me enough time, I'll know everything about all of one as quirks. I've already got yours down, Shudo, and your limit is easy enough to see Ochako. Uraraka and Todoroki shot each other a glance, and Eternum rolled his eyes. Hello, I'm here too? Don't leave me out of this. He gave his best pout, but neither hero moved a muscle. Oh come on. Even Shigaraki gives in when I pout enough. Todoroki narrowed his eyes. You're forgetting, they actually like you. Uraraka swallowed a giggle and Eternum sighed. Fine, but that's harsh, no need to be throwing verbal knives like that. And if you have nothing else to say, then scram. I've gotten bored of you. Uraraka nodded, but Todoroki put a hand on her shoulder. Wait. I do have one last question. Why are you doing this? You're way too young to harbor a grudge against heroes, and your behavior is much too sporadic to be targeting a specific hero. What are you after? There was a suffocating silence, and Eternum thought. After a small hesitation, he sighed. I see no reason to just put my own goals out there, but maybe you should rethink your logic. Just my 2 cents. He turned around and walked over to the punching bag. Picking it up, he withdrew a phone from his pocket, touched the screen a few times, and put it back. I'll be seeing you another time. Probably, anyways, unless one of us kills you before then. If that's the case, bye. A misty black gate appeared behind him, and he vanished through it. Uraraka felt the tension in her shoulder release, and she fell backward on her but, oh my god, I never want to have to face him again. Todoroki shrugged. Maybe so, but we came out here to survey the area, and he's given us plenty of information for his profile. Uraraka raised her eyebrow and Todoroki continued. Before you arrived he had his hood down and voice changer off. His hair is a dusty rose color, long, in a ponytail, and his eyes are green. His natural voice is much higher. I think he's probably our age, or maybe a little bit older. He has some freckles. I couldn't quite see how many, I was farther away from him at the time. He's incredibly smart and very observant. He knows a lot about Class 1A, and quirks in general. But he only knows what's been shown outside of UA classes, or he wouldn't have asked about Inasa. Despite his strength, he's very slight in stature. His face is very plain. Uraraka lit up. Oh, you're right. We should get the information back to Yamamo. I was pretty much finished with my area, and I don't think we should stick around too long if the League knows we're in the area. Eternum was courteous enough, but I don't know about some of the others. Todoroki nodded and the two left. The Hexad got an odd glance from Aizawa when they returned to campus extremely late, but their arrival was otherwise unnoticed. Yaoyorozu had been sure to alert Nizu that they were going to be late, so they weren't reported missing, but none of the staff actually knew what they were up to. They gathered in Yaoyorozu's room to discuss what they had found, and added their newest information to her notes. Finally, the group dismissed for the night. In the school building, the teachers gathered up their materials for the next day's classes. Some remained in the building to plan their lessons, while others returned to the faculty housing building. A few, such as Aizawa and Kan, collaborated with each other to provide the best lessons possible. They took up a few spare classrooms around the building, filling the otherwise empty building with remnants of life. Though not known for its club's successes, which were overshadowed by the heroics course, a number of student clubs were still meeting. Since the move from home to dorms, many clubs had taken the cut in transportation time to elongate their meetings. They would be soon dismissed, since the sun had long set, but some, such as the chess club and student debate society, held longer meetings. In one lone classroom, someone was talking on the phone. Yes, there were some students that left the campus today. No, I'm not sure, but I trust that you got the intel? Ah, good, they nodded. They looked at a list of names in front of them, Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, and Uraraka for certain. They've been regularly meeting for some reason, and I suspect it's to do with the Bakugou game. There were 3 others, you said? They grabbed a pen from their pocket and set the paper on the desk in front of them. Ready to write, they hummed for the person to continue. All right. Ida, I'll take it you mean the younger, able one. Trudged. This strange young man. He was recommended, turned it down, but still got in through the regular exam. And Shinso? No, I'm afraid I'm unfamiliar with him. He entered from the general course, so I've had substantially less contact with him. Given name, Hitoshi. Art, thank you. Yes, I'll keep an eye on them. They flipped the phone shut and sighed. Oh, Tenko. You certainly have a habit of getting yourself into sticky situations. You should try harder to make sure it doesn't rub off on your employees. I've managed to steer clear of your chaotic mess, but poor Midoriya, you dragged him right into it. They laughed a humorless, breathy chuckle of a laugh, and pocketed the phone. Walking out of the room, making sure to flip the lights off, they walked down the halls and left the building. Tsukachi rolled his eyes as he surveyed the scene of the crime. There had been a case of assault and battery, a potential second assault and battery, and an apparently unrelated murder case. The body lay on the ground covered in bruises, while Recovery Girl was healing a man off to the side. Tamakawa Sansa was interviewing the duo while Tsukachi was charged with investigating the scene of the murder. He crouched next to the body and snapped on a pair of LTX gloves. He ran his finger over the false eye on the right side of the dead man's face. What's the deal here? Normal Hero Manual, who had arrived on the scene to de-escalate the attack, was also serving as a key witness to the murder. He leaned down to speak to Tsukachi. The victim here is named Mitsuyoshi Hiroto, and has a muscle enhancement quirk. He's also known for starting street fights, and has many charges against him. He attempted to pick a fight with the man Recovery Girl is currently healing. Yokota Hokuto is a member of the 8 Precepts of Death and is also known as Hojo. The vigilante knuckle duster attempted to intervene, and the fight broke out. though it's unknown if Knuckleduster is the reason or if the fight was simply unavoidable. I was called in shortly thereafter, and by the time I had arrived, Knuckleduster had left and Yokota was badly beaten. I attempted to step between the two, but as I did, Mitsuyoshi collapsed. He most likely died on the spot, since it looked like the shot was through his spinal cord. That rookie, Sun Eater, is searching the area, and he has a number of officers working with him. Tsukachi nodded his thanks and headed towards Amajiki. He was standing over a police officer who was gingerly turning a small black object over in his gloved hands. The man gently handed the object to Tsukachi. We're not quite sure what it is, but it's the projectile that killed Mitsuyoshi. It had trace amounts of his blood on it. Sun Eater was able to confirm that. Amajiki nodded sadly. I was able to transform my hair and arms to match Mitsuyoshi's, but there was no traces of what the bullet was made of. It's completely solid. Tsukachi nodded, aware of Sun Eater's hero work. He was oftentimes found teeming with lemillion, but when he wasn't, he could be found in police laboratories working to identify unknown substances. Most items could be identified based purely on traces, and all items chipped or crumbled when handled too roughly. All items except the weapon of choice, apparently. He frowned. What about trace amounts where you found it? Amajiki's face darkened, and he looked down. It would look suspicious if Sun Eater's social awkwardness wasn't such a publicly known fact. Tsukachi knew how uncomfortable Amajiki was though, so he didn't press the fact. His words were barely mumbled, but they were close enough to hear him. We looked, as well as swabbed the bullet wound, but the only DNA that we could find was from the victim himself. And Hojo even donated some crystals for me to consume. They're almost as hard as diamond. I couldn't even make a scratch. The policeman nodded along with Amajiki's words. My quirk lets me feel things that I touch on a microscopic level. There were no traces of scratches on the bullet at all. Tsukachi sighed. If the item hadn't been pitch black, he'd have a suspicion as to what the item was. The vigilante known as Skeleton had a quirk that let him manipulate his own bones, bending and extending them at will. A side effect was that his bones were also the hardest known substance to mankind, their hardness level unable to be accurately put on the Mohs scale. But the young man's bones were pearly white, not black. He rubbed the bullet pensively. Sun Eater, what other materials did you detect on the bullet? The young man thought. There was dust and dirt, though that can be found on most items. Acorns, I think, cement, some bricks. Tsukachi held up his hand. Acorns, did you say? Amajiki nodded, and Tsukachi smiled. In that case, I think I can safely say that the person who killed Mitsuyoshi was the vigilante known as Skeleton. He's incredibly violent for a vigilante, and has a bone quirk. When he debuted, he shot 7 villains with his quirk using the bone protruding from his face. Amajiki buried his face further into his scarf. I don't like the sound of him. I don't want to face that kind of bad guy. Tsukachi nodded. Yes, understandable. But thank you for this. We'll be able to decisively proceed with the investigation. Both Amajiki and the policeman nodded, and Tsukachi walked away. He had a lot of files to update, to his chagrin, but it was what he was paid to do. And going back over the files could help him figure out exactly what was going on. Aside from a single murder, Skeleton wasn't known for imprudent and unexpected deaths, but from the sounds of it, the victim was shot suddenly and without any previous confrontations on the part of the killer. His first real victim, the hero formerly known as Mirror, had been killed in the dark of night, in his own home. He had killed his wife after raping her, and both of his sons had vanished shorter thereafter. Though it had still been murder, Tsukachi could see how he wanted to act, potentially trying to save the woman's life. But the current case was a different story. Skeleton had been far from the crime, and the only death had been his own kill. Both Manuel and Knuckleduster had been on the scene to pacify the fighters, so Skeleton had no reason to believe the two would be in any danger. Though Mitsuyoshi had killed before and incited fights with abandon, he wasn't one to recklessly kill people in the public view. The entire case was odd in itself, since the League claimed to be waiting for the hero's move. Tsukachi sighed. He'd have a hell of a night ahead of him. Muscular's death hit the League hard. The police had taken 3 days to identify Mitsuyoshi as Muscular, and in that time, no one knew where he was. Each villain still operated on their own outside of the league and weren't required to report in, so when he dropped off the radar he was unlocatable. Only when his death had blown up the front pages of every newspaper in the country did the villains find out. Some of the group didn't react much at all. Moonfish and Mr. Compress remained impassive, though one was likely out of ignorance. A large handful mourned his death, as he provided a powerful trainer and sparring partner for many in the league. Toga cried a bit about how she'd missed the hunky brute of a man, and both Spinner and Nico were there to cheer her up. Shigaraki had been infuriated and not even Kurogiri could assuage his tantrum. Dabi didn't show much emotion as per usual, but he withdrew from the bar and talked wistfully when Muscular came up. Midoriya had only arrived back in the bar the day the identity had been revealed, but he was reacting in his own way as well. He spared some time to comfort Toga and Shigaraki since he was closest to them, and helped Mustard and Nico with their grief, but didn't stay long. He was the informant of the group, and was often running errands to obtain and trade information. This, however, was not one of those errands. Midoriya was on a mission to speak to Sensei. When he arrived, Sensei could already sense the unsettled atmosphere of the impending conversation. "Young Eternum, what seems to be the cause of your visit?" Midoriya sighed aggravatedly. "Oh, you already know what it is, don't play the innocent shtick. Do we have any other options?" The quirk of the woman who ran the disguises in the league had a major setback. Each person who she used her quirk on had to wait for 6 months between sessions, or else their next change could result in the breakdown of tissues, tissue necrosis, or potentially even death. His first disguise had been a simple haircut and small quirk from Sensei, so he hadn't needed to wait between changes, but his next change carried the heavy price everyone else was subject to. Sensei shook his head. "Unfortunately, not even any quirks that I have would likely be able to save you if you began to break down due to her quirk. It is why I remain in this decrepit body. The strongest healing quirk I have, that which keeps me alive, wouldn't be enough to keep my body together if I were to be injured from her quirk. You can dye your hair and change your eyes once more, but your body cannot take another quirk nor take another. For the time being, you will need to lay low and avoid the spotlight." Midoriya growled in frustration. "Oh, for F's sake, how am I supposed to cover up my tracks exactly? I know it can be done, but adding that fun little condition in isn't really working in my favor." Sensei sighed. "Izuku, you know that I can only provide you with so much. You are smart enough that I have let you help in guiding Tamura. You can do it yourself." Midoriya just grumbled and nodded. "Yeah, I know. Doesn't mean I want to." Sensei exuded an ambivalent air and dismissed Midoriya. The young boy trudged out of the room tensely and kicked at a chair near a bar table while walking out. Kurogiri tooted and turned to face him. "Eternum," Midoriya nodded towards him. "You know that I don't appreciate violence against my furniture. But it's been a while since you've been anything other than sadistically cheerful. What brings your recent change in attitude?" Midoriya plopped down at a bar stool and pointed up at the menu. Kurogiri knew exactly what the boy meant, and made off to mix the drink. He slid the boy a glass of water quickly and he groaned. "I have fed up my mission. I've been out since then, but I gotta clean myself up, and I don't know if I can do it well enough. They actually saw me and I dash." Kurogiri gently shook the mixer in his hands and leaned over the bar. "Now wait a second there. Listen to yourself. Where's the Izuku who helped to cover up Toga's identity? Where's the Izuku who successfully became a villain at 14 years old and still hasn't been discovered yet to this day? Where's the Izuku who mercilessly killed dozens of people for the sake of the people he cares about?" Izuku sniffled a bit and pointed at himself. Kurogiri snorted, though it held no animosity. Handing the boy his Mai Tai, he rolled his eyes. "Eternum, you can hardly call yourself the same when you present yourself like this. You're crying and sniffling like an infant. This isn't the Eternum that the League has come to consider family, this is the Eternum who still couldn't see himself as the bad guy. You've come so far, and you have so many people relying on you. We've seen you support them, and you can't fail them now." Midoriya nodded and let out a watery chuckle. "Why, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm just not sure how I can handle this one. The Todoroki boy has seen my face full on, and he could have possibly heard me without my voice changer. How am I supposed to cover that up? Sensei is out of the question, and aside from killing him, I'm not sure what I can do. Kurogiri shrugged. Well, then why don't you kill him? He's hardly a professional. You can't tell me it's because you care for him, I wouldn't believe you. Midoriya sighed. I wish, but he's more heavily guarded in UA than I want to bypass. And no, I don't care for him, but he's Endeavor's son. I don't think I can fully hate anyone who had to live with Endeavor. I've given you his case file, right? I can't believe I ever thought that man was heroic. I'm going to relish when I kill him. Kurogiri nodded. Well, I'll admit that you make a point, but that shouldn't stop you from killing him. Midoriya smiled. Yeah, and given the opportunity, I'll make good on it. Luckily the information won't be spreading very far, so I have a window of opportunity. I know the 6 students who are working behind the backs of the pros. The heroes have systematically rejected help from the students, so their information won't be reaching their ears for the time being. So long as the gap in information exists, I'll have time to destroy physical copies. If that isn't enough, blackmail can be used. All of the students have families that can be used against them. Kurogiri smiled, and Midoriya felt his mood lift. He smiled, teeth shining white, and he was preparing to thank Kurogiri for his encouragement when suddenly Mustard burst through the door. Eternum. Kurogiri. The heroes are here, they've found us. Endeavor was aggravated as he rounded up the makeshift team of heroes and police, but for once in his life, he was satisfied with his hero work. It was no secret that the League of Villains was working to kill All Might, and that the man himself was dedicating all he could to stopping them. Yet even with all of his feelers out in the world, it had been Endeavor who had located the hideout of the villains. It was a small victory in the long run, but a victory nonetheless. Heroes were scattered around the area, running over procedures and routes. Kamui Wood stood with Desidegoro, both who were still fuming from the loss of their friend Empty Lady. The faculty of UA had their own divisions surrounding the bar. Every agency involved with their staff was in attendance, sidekicks swarming around the building aplenty. Others, such as Best Jeanist and Ryukyu, were there because the highest heroes had been called in. Though much information had been left out of the briefing, much to Endeavor's rage, it was made clear that the villains had both the ability to use a quirk against its user and could permanently render a person quirkless. Ragdoll was living proof, and Endeavor had vowed to make sure to never end up like her. She had been weak and foolish to let the villains take advantage of her, but Enji Todoroki was no fool. He would not let himself succumb to filthy villains who thought themselves above the law. All Might, curse the man, was making his way toward the front of the building, obviously readying himself for some sort of speech, when a young man walked out of the door. He was unarmed and seemingly uncaring, intent to look All Might in the eye. Yagi Tashinori? It's about time you made your move. I'd love to kill you on the spot, but that would leave me more than vulnerable. If I've learned anything in my life, it's that you cannot entrust your life to the heroes. So I'm simply here to bring a message on behalf of the League. He grinned widely, cracked lips splitting and dark baggy eyes boring holes into every hero. You're on our game board now. We have home advantage. Don't dash. A shot rang out as Snipe aimed carefully and let a bullet loose. It wove through the air and hurtled towards Shigaraki, but right as it was about to strike, a brilliant blue wall shone into existence in front of Shigaraki. The bullet crumpled as it struck the barrier, and then dropped to the ground. The wall vanished just as quickly as it appeared, and a young man with blonde hair stepped forward. He wore a beak-like mask over his mouth, and his eyes were closed. It's not but your fault for underestimating us. Shigaraki smiled, a small smile that was no less unnerving. You've made your move. Oh, I've been so excited for this game, I can't wait to see how many people lose. A misty black portal opened up behind him, and both men stepped through. The heroes waited for a second, but the gate remained open. Confusion thickened the air, and for a moment, no one moved. Finally, 2 glowing yellow eyes blinked open from the mist, and a deep voice vibrated through everyone's skulls. What? You can hardly think you'll be able to find us without entrance to our lair? We're no amateurs, and only an idiot would connect the base of operations to the entrance directly. So go ahead and doubt me as you will, but I'm offering a convenient cut in time. Or would you rather stay out here, As he spoke, a sickening grumble echoed through the alleys of Kamino. Kurogiri chuckled darkly before his eyes closed and vanished. A handful of heroes were glancing around to try and find the source of the rumble, but not a single one was fast enough to find its cause. Right before it struck, Endeavor let out a warning shout, but no one was fast enough to react. Swooping down from the sky, a winged beast sunk its talons into a pair of sidekicks who had just been standing by Best Jeanist's side. They both shrieked as they were carried away into the night, though the blood left behind by the pair was telling of their survivability. Soon, almost a dozen similar creatures began to filter into the clearing. All of them were hulking monsters, no brains and all brawn. Endeavor was familiar enough with his fellow hero Eraserhead to know the man was unshakable. He had faced death time and time again, taking down villains unlike those that fought by the light of day, and still got up to fight the next day. He had almost died at the hands of a similar creature, the one that had broken into the USJ on the UA campus, but his first reaction had been to confirm the safety of the students. Endeavor didn't care about the man, but could admit that his convictions were infallible. He was a strong man who rose strong heroes and fought with a strong heart and stronger mind. When the underground hero's eyes widened in fear, and he began to tremble, Endeavor realized they were in for a much worse time than they could have anticipated. Both Present Mike and All Might seemed to realize this at the same time he did, and the obnoxiously loud hero began to shout orders, ushering hero after hero into the swirling black portal. Endeavor wanted to resist the man's ideas, but the fact was that even All Might had been barely able to face a single, unrefined creature when he had fought to save the students' lives. Even if he didn't like All Might, he could admit that he was unable to be surpassed because of his strength. If the world's strongest man had been threatened by a single Numu, a dozen would demolish every single person there with ease. Directing his squad of sidekicks into the black mist, he turned to take a tally of every Numu in the area. Counting as fast as he could, he grimaced when he found that 2 were missing. The pterodactyl from previously was still unseen, and another was missing as well. Glancing quickly at Ryukyu to silently convey his attendance count, he ignited his flames as hot as he could while she turned into a dragon and took to the skies. Glowering at the monsters in front of him, he dug his heel into the dirt and readied himself for battle. Sheet. Ochako, he's still bleeding. You need to get us out of here. Yaoyorozu was rapidly pulling gauze out of her bosom while Uraraka pulled Todoroki's unconscious, weightless body after them. His left arm was cut off just below the shoulder joint and was profusely bleeding. Tapping Yaoyorozu and then herself, she launched over the warehouse roof, and the trio landed roughly. Swallowing the vomit in her mouth, she kept running even as the beast barreled through the walls of the building behind them. She gagged, blood souring her mouth. I can't keep going for forever, my quirk is going to give out eventually. Yaoyorozu's eyes were crazily desperate, even if her voice was calm. As she tightly wrapped the gauze around Todoroki's stump, she swallowed audibly, I know, and mine won't hold out much longer either, but as long as Shudo doesn't wake up to cauterize his wound, we have to guard him. Both of them could hear the labored breathing of the Numu running after them, and Uraraka let out a silent sob. Yamamo, I'm getting dizzy from nausea. I can barely walk straight. Almost as if to prove her point, she tripped over a spilled trash can, landing face first on the ground. There was a disgusting crunch, and her nose began to bleed profusely. Yaoyorozu gently placed Todoroki on the ground and yanked Uraraka up. It was only then that Uraraka noticed how shriveled Yaoyorozu looked. Her biarstis were sagging from fat loss, and her stomach looked ready to cave in. Her thighs were beginning to thin unhealthily, and the shoulders of her suit were beginning to slack. We can't just stop. I'm running out of quirk left to use, and your quirk isn't going to stop that Numu. Todoroki could possibly kill it if he was awake, but he's barely even alive right now. We need to move. Uraraka nodded hazily and made to grab for Todoroki, but before she could, she collapsed once again and vomited. Yaoyorozu went to pull her up, but stopped in her tracks as she saw the blood in her vomit. The Numu appeared out of nowhere, bladed spines bristling, and it locked eyes with Yaoyorozu. She felt her heart fall into her stomach, and prepared for the inevitable death. The Numu's spike began to elongate, shiny metallic spines shooting towards her. From above, Dragoon heroine Ryukyu swooped down, landing on the metal rods that nearly ended Yaoyorozu's life. The Numu shrieked in pain as they splintered under the dragon's weight. Ryukyu turned to the students and narrowed her eyes. "I'm not sure what you're doing here, but we need to leave. There's more around Kamino, and none of you are in any condition to fight." Yaoyorozu shook her head. "But there's others. It's not just us. Inesa, Tenya, and Hitoshi are also here. We don't know what happened to them. We got separated when another Numu dropped a dead body on us." Ryukyu audibly sighed. "Sheet, okay, new plan. Everyone get on me. OF-, is that Todoroki? Oh, his father is going to kill someone. We need to get him to medical. You two, get him on me, and I'll fly us to Recovery Girl. She's stationed at the mall, which should be safe. She'll be able to help all of you, but I doubt Todoroki will be getting his arm back. We need to get moving now." Yaoyorozu nodded and did her best to heft the two onto the heroine's back, before hopping on herself. She took off and soared, passing over warehouse after warehouse. A few hundred meters away, Yaoyorozu saw a figure flying through the air, and she gasped, "It's Inesa. He's airborne. I think he's looking for the others." Ryukyu hummed affirmatively before landing in the town square. Yaoyorozu helped to get the two unconscious students to the doctors before being led away herself. Ryukyu gave the young woman a quick nod before taking back off. "I'll make sure he stays safe." Yaoyorozu wanted to call back out to the heroine but was stopped as an elderly hand gripped onto her wrist. Looking down, Recovery Girl smiled sadly. "You're in no condition to fight, sweetie. You should come with me. Your quirk will start eating at your muscles if you strain yourself too much more, and I can't heal you like that. Todoroki and Uraraka will be perfectly okay and will make full recoveries. Uraraka can recover from overusage of her quirk with some good rest. And though Todoroki may never have his arm back, he's in no danger. I promise you that all three of you will be all right." Her smile was soft and reassuring, and even if Yaoyorozu's heart was thundering in her chest, fear clogging her common sense, it was grounding enough. Nodding, she slowly followed Recovery Girl into the building. "No, my quirk isn't working against it. I'm not sensing any sort of sentient autonomy in it. It's not quite there." "That's all right, Shinso. We'll simply have to avoid it until we can find the others." Togata dodged another grasp of the flying Numu's talons and countered with a devastating punch. Even though it didn't connect, the Numu went flying backwards, crashing into the side of a warehouse. He phased through the debris that rained down over him and quickly reappeared next to Shinso. Shinso swallowed in half awe, half terror, and the power his former senpai boasted. He had never seen him demonstrate the power before, but he acted as if it was as simple as an exercise given to them as an assignment. He was snapped out of his thoughts as the Numu moved again and Togata readied himself for another punch. Both were caught by surprise when a white, winged figure swooped in and landed a kick on the Numu's exposed brain, earning a deafening wail of pain. They leapt off of the body and backflipped before landing, wings shifting back into familiar arms. "Sun Eater! Tamaki!" The timid hero had a terrified expression on, but his muscles were no less set. "Get him to safety. There's another one roaming around here. It wounded some others. It can produce blades from the spines on its back. Urashi, Yaoyorozu, Uraraka, and Todoroki have been accounted for by Ryukyu." There was a wail of shock as the Numu in question burst through the walls of the same warehouse the other Numu was slumped against. There was a sickening squelch as the body was crushed, and the three scrambled away from the beast. Shinso grunted, "I'm not feeling any sentience from that one either. My quirk is out." Togata hummed an affirmation. Amajiki shifted again, his arms turning into giant tentacles. Shinso yelped as one tentacle grabbed him and launched him out of the way of a Numu's blade. Togata turned around and sent off a punch, shockwaves hurtling towards the Numu, but when they hit, nothing happened. Amajiki frowned. "Lemillion, you know they'll be designed against you, you can't." Togata's smile fluctuated for a second. "I can't just stop, there's a student here, and I'm not going to let him get hurt." Amajiki's face darkened. "Mirio, they're meant to nullify you, not me. I can help, I can dash." "No!" Togata's words were much harsher than Shinso had ever heard them before, and Amajiki flinched back. Togata softened a bit and bit his lip. Tamaki, I can't let you get hurt by this. We don't have the power to subdue it and we can't outrun it. That only leaves one option, you know. Amajiki's face darkened again, and his eyes went wide. No, you can't. You know that'll just hurt you and you can't use your quirk like that. I'm not going to lose you like we did Nijire. No villain is going to take you from me. Togata sighed, but his eyes betrayed the conflict inside of him. Tamaki. No, I can't let you do this. If we both work together, we could both get out fine. I can't just let you sacrifice yourself like this. His voice was pleading, and his eyes were beginning to water. Togata mirrored him, eyes scrunched shut but glistening with tears. Tamaki, we might both die. We need to make sure of the student's safety. We can't even be sure your plan is going to work other than kill you. It's safer with both of us here, and you know that if this fails, we're not going to make it. Please, Mirio, why won't you listen to me? The Amajiki before Shinso was a polar opposite of who he had known in school. Where the other was shy and uncertain in himself, this one was loud and pleading, and terrified that the other's plan wasn't the best course of action. One tentacle was wrapped tightly around Togata's hand, and the other gripped onto it tightly. Suddenly the Numu burst through the building they were in. The rubble showered the trio, Shinso shouting as a brick took out his knee. Both Togata and Amajiki rushed over to him, but he grunted in pain. I can't. My knee won't move. And just as he said, the joint was bent horrifically backwards, bleeding and broken. Togata picked him up, shoved the boy into Tamaki's arms. Go. I can keep him distracted. Please, just get him to safety. Amajiki nodded and bolted out the door. Second later, a shock wave was launched at the beast, who rocketed backwards. It collided with the pillar of the building. Combined with the terrifyingly strong shock that had just traveled through the cement, the building began to buckle. Looking upwards, Togata shot a punch at the ceiling, which collapsed around him from the force. He lunged out of the way, and Shinso wondered why the hero hadn't become permeable yet. When he looked closer, both of the young man's arms were shattered and swelling with blood. Amajiki gasped as a piece of rubble slammed into Togata's back. Mirio! No! He began to panic and dropped Shinso, who landed painfully. Running off to the scene, Amajiki shifted his tentacle arms into a monstrous amalgamation, long, bony arms covered with suckers and a fine coat of down feathers. He grabbed onto a pillar that was still standing and used it to launch himself over the wreckage. The combination between the wing strength of a goose and the grip and length of the octopus tentacles helped him to lift up the impossibly heavy chunk of concrete on top of Togata, who had fallen unconscious. Amajiki sobbed out loud in despair, and grew another set of tentacles to pick up Togata. Just as he moved to run out of the collapsing building, the Numu behind him grunted in rage and moved. It shot out a series of blades that impaled through both Togata and Amajiki. The latter sobbed in pain and used his remaining tentacles to snap the spines so he could move. But the more he snapped, the more the monster threw at him. Spines were protruding from every limb on Sun Eater, who was struggling to move. Blade would pin his feet to the ground, stab after stab, until his feet began to look more like carrion. One had even pierced his neck, blood gushing out of the wound. Huddling Togata close to his chest, he took a bite of his own armor and swallowed it, morphing his torso into the durable Kevlar material. He gasped raggedly and leaned his head down, placing a small kiss on Togata's forehead. He smiled sadly. I'm sorry, but I can only save one of us. And you have so much more waiting for you. I'm nothing without you, Mirio. I became a hero because you believed in me. I endured Nijire's death because you were there for me. I couldn't just leave you to die like this. He turned up to Shinso, whose face had gone blank with shock. Amajiki tried to look the boy in the eyes, but even while he was facing death, he couldn't overcome the fear. Facing away, eyes closed in shame, he ummed in despair. I'm sorry. I failed to keep you safe. I failed both you and Mirio. Please keep him safe. Don't let the League get him, either of you. He looked back down at Togata's limp form, taking in one last glance of his closest friend, and smiled. I'm sorry I never got to tell you how much I loved you. In a final push of strength, he used 2 of his tentacles to throw the blonde. He crashed through the window and skidded to a stop right before Shinso. The pain jolted him awake, and he tried to get up but lost his balance. He fell over, hands being sliced open on the glass shards around him. He whipped his head around. Titaniki? Where is He? Turning to face the building he had almost died in, he was just in time to catch one last, mournful smile from his raven-haired hero before the entire building collapsed.